A young woman with a big heart.
She was the most compassionate, caring, captivating person I've ever met. She was in a very good place in her life.
Murdered in a terrifying attack.
Somebody set the body on fire and left. Her last few minutes of life was pure hell.
Detectives discover a secret affair.
They had started to develop more of a relationship.
We told him straight up, you're the killer, and we're going to have your DNA.
Then uncover a surprising suspect hunting for prey.
The night that she was murdered, she had answered a call.
There was a note. The directions were to a fictitious place.
He was trying to trick young women.
A second tragedy sparks terror in the community.
We may be dealing with a serial killer.
I lived in fear. I was terrified to go out at night.
Before a calculating killer is ultimately revealed.
This is not real. This can't be happening. This is crazy.
Just 90 minutes from the bright lights of Nashville, Tullahoma, Tennessee is a quaint city full of Southern charm.
Tullahoma is a very small town. Everybody knows everybody. Your teachers at the high school are the same teachers that taught your grandparents. The community is very close-knit.
The people there are genuine. It's a safe place to live. We don't have a lot of violent crime.
In the early morning of July 2nd, 2012, a grisly crime is discovered that sets the whole town on edge.
I got the call that a couple of younger people were driving down a very, very rural road, and they seen a fire. They were going to put the fire out, but when they went over there, they noticed that it was a body that was on fire and called 911. When I arrived at the scene, several other investigators were there and said, this is real bad. It appeared that foul play was involved. We wasn't sure that she was murdered at this spot. It appeared that somebody may have just pulled over or backed up, dumped the body, set the body on fire, and left.
There were some tire tracks. We couldn't plaster cast them because they were in gravel. I just kind of surveyed what we had. There was no evidentiary value. Where do we go from here?
First responders extinguish the fire, and investigators take a closer look at the scene.
As we worked our way closer to the body, you started to get a sense of, how horrible this actually was.
It's just like something you would see off of a movie. This is not real. This can't be happening. This is crazy. The victim was a young white female, possibly in her 20s.
There was star tattoos behind each one of her ears.
And there was a magnolia leaf tattoo. I remember she had a shirt on. It had something to do with the nursing technical school. She was undressed from the waist down. Body was partially burned and covered in soot. The fire was relegated to her pelvic area.
It led us to believe that there'd been a sexual assault. Someone had obviously tried to burn the evidence up.
Her body was already in rigor. I would believe that she was deceased at the time of the fire.
What was very glaring was blunt force trauma to her head.
You could actually feel the broken bones in the skull.
Detectives immediately attempt to identify the young victim.
There was no purse, no cell phone, no license, no vehicle to help us identify who the victim was.
Investigators speak to the couple who made the 911 call.
They didn't know who the person was. They didn't see or hear anyone. It was obvious almost immediately. They didn't have anything to do with this homicide. It was very traumatic for them. They just couldn't believe it.
At the scene, I made the suggestion to put what information we had on social media to help us identify her.
Within a few short hours, local mother of four, Kelly Sharpton, sees the missing persons report posted online.
Mom was at work, and there was a post about a young girl that had been found When she came across the section that said she had star tattoos, I was told that Mom screamed out in the middle of her office. And then, of course, she called the sheriff's office.
She introduced herself, and we started talking, and the description seemed similar. The tattoos seemed to match.
Kelly instantly heads down to the police station for a formal interview.
When we interviewed Kelly, she was distraught. She was crying, and she identified the body in Todd's office on pictures. The victim was her daughter, Megan Sharpton.
I walked in, and I immediately heard my mom sobbing, and I can still hear her to this day. She just said somebody killed her last night. And it took me a second to figure out what she had just said, and then it hit me that she was gone.
24-year-old Megan Sharpton was a bright young woman with a big heart.
She was genuine. She was the most compassionate, caring, captivating person I've ever met. She and I were really, really, really close. She had the best laugh. She was so fun.
I could count on Megan to do anything for me. I knew she was always there. She was absolutely hilarious, very bold, but at the same time, you could tell she didn't want to be the center of attention.
Regardless of who you were, where you were from, she didn't care. She really, truly cared for every single person.
Megan had decided to turn her caring nature into a career.
She was working herself, through nursing school. Megan would have been an amazing nurse. She had her head on straight and was, ready to get going with her career.
Along with her calling, Megan had also found love.
She lived with her boyfriend, Chris. They were together 3 to 4 years. They had the same, group of friends.
She was in a very good place in her life. She had lots of goals to go on to those next levels in school, in her career. Megan was about 2 months away from graduation. She was very excited about it. Never in a million years did I think that somebody would kill her.
Investigators start piecing together a timeline of Megan's last known movements.
I spoke to her that Sunday afternoon. It was about 4 or 5. We would go to Mom's on Sunday and visit and have dinner and just kind of hang out as a family.
But that Sunday was different. Megan said she would be skipping dinner as she had a last-minute job interview.
She said that she would head to Mom's at some point.
But Megan never showed up.
Later on that night, she wasn't there. It wasn't a concern for us. We all thought, okay, well, something else must have come up. She was on her own time, and we'll see her sometime tomorrow.
Tragically, it would only be a matter of hours before Megan is discovered dead and on fire.
I was very much in shock that day. It didn't sink in that somebody killed her. It was just very, very hard to process.
In the interview, Carrie and Megan's mom told us what kind of car she drives. We put a bolo out for that car.
When investigators ask who could have been responsible for Megan's death, her sister doesn't hesitate.
I said, Chris did it, Megan's boyfriend. And that is the only thing that made any sense to me. He asked me, why do you think Chris did it? I thought, Chris and Megan had an up and down relationship. They were like oil and water. They would be hot-headed and tempered at times.
Majority of the time that a female's killed in the United States, it's someone that knew her. As quick as we could, we want to talk to him.
He is a very high suspect.
Coming up, police learn Megan's love life is more complicated than it first appears.
Another person had actually been in a relationship with Megan.
Did a dangerous love triangle lead to Megan's death?
When someone is murdered like that, it's got to be a jilted lover.
She had intended to leave him. That would be an absolute motive for murder.
Just when detectives believe they have an airtight case, a new piece of evidence changes everything.
I saw the video surveillance of that person.
It caught my attention big time.
Never would I have thought it would wind up like this.
Detectives investigating the vicious murder of 24-year-old Megan Sharpton in Tullahoma, Tennessee, have their first suspect, her 25-year-old boyfriend, Chris Farrell.
Chris and Megan, to me, had an off and on relationship. They were both very hot-headed at times, and there were bumps in their relationship.
Once Megan and Chris got together, they were inseparable, but towards the end of Megan's life, the relationship had started growing apart at that point.
As far as Chris is concerned, it was just the only person that was with her on a daily basis. That was the only thing that made sense.
As detectives prepare to bring in Chris for questioning, a fresh lead comes in.
The Bedford County Sheriff's Office had located her car. So I had picked up and rushed to where the car was found at.
The car was sitting out in a rural area between Tullahoma and Shelbyville, Tennessee, approximately 15 to 20 miles away from the crime scene where Megan was found.
This is an odd place, odd way to leave a car. The car was, that of any young person's. It was cluttery, but there was none of her personal effects.
Investigators do find one item that grabs their attention.
There was a note in the vehicle in a girl's handwriting where Megan was going.
It was directions on how to get to an address.
The next thing was to find this address, but there was no address that fit the note.
The directions were to a fictitious place.
In talking to her mother, I learned that she had left to go to this job. Was this the directions that she was given? Did someone lure her here with the intention of doing harm to her? The way this thing was shaping up is that she was abducted where her car was found. She was killed somewhere else and was found on Awalt Road.
We just sealed that car off and sent it on to the crime lab for DNA testing.
Investigators then head to Megan's apartment to talk to her boyfriend, Chris.
The boyfriend was the first person we looked at. He was distraught. On the night of the murder, Chris had told us that he had left for work, and she had told him before he left she had accepted a job by phone that a girl she had went to school with recommended her for this job, and that she would return in the morning. And in fact, she didn't return. And he became worried, and he had reached out to her mother.
Following up on what Megan's sister, Carrie, had told them, detectives asked Chris if he and Megan had been having any problems.
Chris described him and Megan's relationship as a good relationship, that they had their ups and downs like anybody else, but that he would never hurt Megan.
Detectives are suspicious he might be hiding something. Why else would Megan's sister point the finger at him so readily? They asked Chris to come down to the station for further questioning.
We interviewed Chris, and he was visibly shaken.
When pressed about his relationship with Megan, Chris changes his story.
He was quite honest. He said, that they didn't have the best relationship, that, it'd been somewhat strained. He felt like that maybe she wanted him to have a better job or maybe be more career-orientated.
Megan was getting ready to graduate college and start her career, and I don't think Chris was there at that point in his life. He was still, wanted to be young.
Chris swears he had nothing to do with Megan's death.
Chris's alibi was that he was at work at a local department store where the majority of the night he's going to be on or near some sort of camera.
Chris tells police he left for work at 5 p.m. and was there past midnight. But until his alibi can be confirmed and Megan's time of death is determined, he remains on the suspect list.
From my interview with Chris, I learned that there was another person that lived in the house, Robbie Rosar.
Robbie was one of Chris's friends. He moved in there at the end. My first thought was Robbie hurt Megan, that I'd never met in my life, that I know, nothing about other than what Megan told me. He was a little rough around the edges, but Megan loved everyone.
I reached out that day and I asked him to come in. Robbie was a different person. Robbie was a little darker, a little less happy person.
Investigators ask Robbie point blank where he was when Megan was murdered.
Robbie didn't have an alibi. Robbie showed us he had been texting her all night, even in the morning, worried about her.
He said, look, I'm not the killer. I want y'all to find out who killed Megan. And he was very, very adamant.
He wanted to prove his innocence, which was a good indication for me that he didn't do this.
But when detectives ask Robbie about the nature of their relationship, his answer leaves them stunned.
Robbie told me that he had actually been in a relationship with Megan, that they were in fact lovers, and that she had intended to leave Chris. It was a shocker.
Megan had told me a few weeks before her murder that her and Robbie had started to develop more of a relationship versus just friends.
When Chris knew about Robbie, that would be an absolute motive for murder.
And so, again, that's when we thought, did Chris do this? If things got crazy and tensions got high and emotions ran high, this would be a motive for homicide.
A day after 24-year-old Megan Sharpton was violently killed, detectives suspect jealousy could have motivated her murder. Megan was having an affair, but did her boyfriend Chris know?
When someone is murdered like that, you always think it's got to be someone close to her. It's got to be like a jilted lover.
We brought Chris back in the interview room after speaking with Robbie, and we kind of dropped that bombshell on him just to see his reaction.
It turns out Chris did not know about the relationship. Chris was upset. He was visibly upset when he found out that Megan had had relations with Rob, but he maintained that he still loved her and that he'd never hurt her. Chris was sincere, and I believe that was true.
Both of them individually took polygraphs. The questions asked were very pointed, Did you cause Megan's death? They were very straight up. They both passed.
When Chris and Rob's polygraph came in, it moved them down on the list of suspects. You can't really take them off the list of suspects. They're just simply too close to the victim. But it did move them down.
Putting Chris and Robbie on the back burner, detectives turned to the job offer Megan received the night she was killed. Could that have been connected to her death?
After the polygraph, I started mulling over Chris's interview and the original nuggets that he had given me about the job. He had told us that he thought that it had come in from a girl she had went to school with previously. He had said that I only remember her name is Naomi.
Investigators searched through school records and discover Megan had a classmate named Naomi Jones.
Finding her to talk to her about the possibility that she recommended this job to Megan was going to be very important. Had this job possibly led to her death? I went to Naomi's residence. I knocked on the door. Nobody there. I drug out my lawn chair and I sat in the front and I'm going to wait. I'm going to get this statement today. The neighbor kept looking over there like, who is this crazy guy? And I was like, I need to talk to Naomi Jones. He knew the Joneses well enough to have called her. When talking to Naomi, I said, hey, I'm Todd Hyman. I'm with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. I'm investigating the death of Megan Sharpton.
Naomi stated that, she knew Megan. They wasn't close.
She had went to school with the year before in nursing school. I learned that they rode to clinicals maybe once together, and she offered up the fact that her husband had drove them. Further talking to her, I learned that she didn't really like Megan for whatever reason. She was very to the point and said, I wouldn't recommend that girl for anything.
Naomi says she has no knowledge of Megan's job offer or her death. While investigators consider their next move, the autopsy report comes in, and it contains a surprising detail.
The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the face and blunt force trauma. She was burned, so the soot had kind of hid the wound.
Megan was shot what the medical examiner's office believes to be a .22 caliber round.
Her skull was broken in several pieces. It's very possible she was hit with a pistol and shot with a pistol.
The autopsy revealed she was deceased at the time of the fire.
She was purposefully burned in an attempt to hide evidence.
The autopsy indicates the fire was set shortly before Megan's body was discovered at 1:18 a.m. on July 2nd. Her time of death was likely before midnight.
Her last moments alive were pretty terrifying.
The report also confirms what police suspected at the scene.
The doctor that performed the autopsy said that there was a presence of sexual assault. There was DNA present. I started feeling like there could be a resolution more quickly with that piece of evidence.
The DNA is rushed to the crime lab for analysis. Then, 2 days after Megan's death, detectives get another possible lead.
July the 4th, there was a guy in the creek fishing who found Megan's purse along with her driver's license, social security card. We never did find her cell phone.
Megan's cell is still missing, but investigators order her phone records, hoping they might point to her killer. As the days start to pass by, Megan's family becomes anxious for answers.
10 days after they found her body, we decided to raise a reward for any information leading to the killer of Meg's case.
Many in town begin to wonder if Megan's murder is connected to another high-profile investigation.
It was the same time frame as the Holly Bobo case that was going on. It was a whodunit, just as ours. It was in Darden, Tennessee, which wasn't too far from here. And, immediately some citizens would ask me, do you think there's any connection?
As detectives compare both cases, they have a chilling realization.
Holly Bobo was a nursing student also. She was abducted from her home. I don't believe her body had been recovered. We obviously had to look at the parallels. Was it a nursing student serial killer?
It's another lead and it's somewhere to go. You've got a killer running around. Who is he going to kill next?
2 weeks after Megan Sharpton was murdered, investigators are searching for a link to the unsolved disappearance of another nursing student in a nearby town a year earlier.
The Holly Bobo case became interest to us, and our investigators reached out to theirs. There was concern that we may be dealing with a serial killer.
While detectives from both cases work together to establish a link, rumors sweep through the community.
I was terrified to go out at night. I didn't like going places I wasn't familiar with, and I lived in fear almost of just everyone.
With Megan's killer still at large, the sense of loss begins to overwhelm her family.
I was really hoping that it would be solved pretty quickly because it was consuming Mom minute by minute. I could feel her emptiness when Megan passed away. She was never the same again.
It absolutely became a mission. I know if it had been my child, I would want somebody to have went that extra mile, to work that extra hour, to find the resolution to what had happened.
Finally, 3 weeks into the investigation, police get the results from the forensic search of Megan's vehicle.
It came back with no evidence. Didn't find anything that shouldn't have been there. There was nothing of value found.
Detectives hope tests on the DNA found inside Megan's body will yield better results. Her approximate time of death was before midnight, so investigators circle back to her boyfriend's alibi.
He said he was working at the time that happened.
Chris was working as a cashier on the evening shift. We go back and pull the video. He was in the store when Megan had been killed. This is not our guy.
Chris contacts police with a lead that sends the investigation in a new direction.
The original phone call about this job opportunity came into an older phone that Megan had.
Chris is able to locate the phone and shows it to detectives.
He was able to go back and find a number that he believed had called proposing this job.
When investigators run the phone number, they get a surprising result.
It was what we refer to as a burner phone.
The burner phone, the fake address, and the suspicious job opportunity all add up to what detectives suspected early on.
She was going to a fake job interview.
So if we could track that phone down, we could get to very possibly who the perpetrator was.
Because burner phones don't require a registered name, the number doesn't lead to anyone.
So I was able to at least track the phone to being sold at the department store here, and I called their loss prevention person. I was like, well, can you pull every one of these sales that was done?
There was like 11 or 12 burner phones purchased, and we pulled video.
We started looking at the males and the questionable ones, and just, you know, who looks like the most suspect person in these pictures.
One of the people paid for their phone, that burner phone, but they had their cell phone out on the camera. And just the demeanor and that just really caught Todd's attention.
It caught my attention big time. He's already got a cell phone. He's buying this burner phone for a reason. We were able to use the video from the department store to follow him from the purchase, out the door, into the parking lot. Almost off camera, we saw him approach a red pickup truck. Why would you park that far out unless you were trying to avoid detection? I take the pictures of this guy and I circulate it to other departments. Within minutes, I had an identification of who this was. This guy's name was Timothy Gifford.
Timmy Gifford is a local drug dealer, not the most honest person around.
I put the word out that I need to find Mr. Gifford. I felt like he was our guy or he was involved.
Officers soon track Timmy down and bring him to the station.
We set him down in the interview room. I show him, you know, the picture of him buying the phone.
We told him straight up, you're the killer, and we're going to have your DNA. And Timmy was, you know, he was stressed out.
He was like, you know, I'll tell you everything I know. I didn't do this. It wasn't me.
Timmy says he doesn't know Megan and denies speaking to her. When challenged about the burner phone, he tells police he bought it a month before the murder for someone else.
He's like, Donnie Jones. I was like, you gotta be kidding.
Donnie Jones was a police informant.
Donnie had been a bad boy for a long time. He had a very long rap sheet, thefts and drugs.
Donnie Jones had served time before, and he had been accused of rape before. That right there was a real turn in investigation.
At first, detectives struggled to see how someone like Donnie could even be connected to Megan.
We found out that Donnie was married to Naomi Jones. That was another nugget that was very interesting.
Detectives had already talked to Naomi earlier in the investigation. She told police she did know Megan, but she had never recommended her for a job.
Naomi was somebody that Megan went to school with. They would carpool with each other occasionally. And we found out that Naomi's husband, Donnie Jones, would drive them if the weather was bad. Naomi's connected to a male with a criminal history, and he knew Megan Sharpton. There was a lot of aha moments in this case, but that was, we're going somewhere. We've got something here.
3 weeks after the murder of Megan Sharpton, detectives are interviewing Timmy Gifford. He tells police he bought the burner phone for Donnie Jones and divulges important details about the red truck seen in the surveillance footage.
Timmy Gifford said that the truck was Donnie's and that a few days after the murder, he had replaced all the interior. And I was like, ooh, that's probably my murder vehicle right there.
The carpet has been replaced. It's been completely detailed. That is a clue that you may be on the right track.
Timmy also tells police Donnie traded the truck to his brother a week after the murder.
Everything is pointing towards Donnie Jones. As quick as we could, we got the search warrant, and we took the truck directly to the TBI crime lab.
Investigators have zeroed in on Donnie as a suspect and quickly pay him a visit.
In his initial statement to me, it was something to the effect of, you know, I hardly know that girl.
I ain't never had no contact with her.
But you knew of her?
Yeah, I did know of her. I don't know much about her. I knew of her. When's the last time you talked to Megan? I ain't never talked to her. No, I take it back. When my old lady was going to school, one day they both needed to ride.
Donnie is adamant he had nothing to do with Megan's death.
His alibi was he was home with the kids.
I'm with my kids all the time. That's all I do. I got a 9-month-old and 7-year-old twin.
Without something concrete showing that he was home, his alibi didn't hold water. He could have left with the children, he could have left the children with somebody.
Detectives confront Donnie with Timmy's claims.
This guy said he gave you this phone, and this is the last number to call her when she was alive.
He said he gave a phone to me?
Yes.
He ain't gave me no phone.
I have nothing to hide. Y'all can search my house. Y'all can do it now.
We searched the house. We didn't come up with a lot of evidence. There was very little to be found.
Donnie also consents to provide a DNA sample. While they wait on the results, detectives get the forensics back on the red truck.
The truck had been cleaned, almost sanitized. Even the interior parts that I gathered off the search warrant, they didn't come back with any evidentiary value.
Megan's family is briefed on the new developments.
I saw the video, surveillance of that person purchasing the burner cell phone. I saw somebody that none of us knew that had no association to Megan whatsoever. Todd had a name of the person who that burner cell phone was purchased for, and I just kind of shrugged my shoulders like, okay, who is this guy? Nothing made any sense to me.
4 weeks after Megan's murder, the crime lab sends investigators the results of the analysis on the DNA from Megan's autopsy.
We got a DNA hit.
And the hit come back, and it's Donnie Frank Jones.
A supervisor of mine called Donnie up, and he's like, hey, you know, I need to meet with you.
Donnie comes down to the station where detectives confront him.
I said, did you and Megan Sharpton ever date? No. Did you and Megan Sharpton ever just hook up, one night stand, party or something? No. Were you and Megan Sharpton during this date, you know, the date of the homicide? No. And then Todd asked, you know, why would your DNA be inside of her? And it was just, his face went, he just couldn't believe it.
He got very, very, very irate, mad. After he had a moment, Donnie said, I just had sex with her.
However, his initial statement of he had never been around her other than at one time kind of put him in a corner.
Detectives don't buy Donnie's story. but they'll need something more concrete to press charges.
All we can prove right now is he had sex with her.
That was a concern of the district attorney, is that, you know, a consensual relationship could have left that evidence behind.
Investigators have no choice but to let Donnie go.
It was really frustrating for me.
I was in complete disbelief. It was infuriating that he said it was consensual, and so he was allowed to walk free as they put the pieces together.
Hoping to prove who was with Megan when she was murdered, detectives run a detailed search on 4 phones: Megan's, Donnie's, Timmy's, and the burner.
We asked for cell phone GPS analysis. They can take some technical data and plot it out on a map and show you to some certainty an area where a phone call was made. We're in kind of a waiting pattern, hoping for phone records for the silver bullet to kind of put this thing away.
The cell phone analysis will take weeks, but investigators get a chance to get Donnie off the streets when they discover a rifle in the trunk of his car.
Donnie's a convicted felon. A convicted felon cannot possess firearms.
Even though the rifle is determined not to be the murder weapon, it's enough to arrest Donnie. Now detectives must establish if he killed Megan Sharpton.
We got him into custody. We had the DNA, but at the same time, we needed more. We needed as much as we possibly could get.
It's all theoretical until you can prove he murdered her.
4 months after Megan's murder, investigators receive the detailed phone data and find a clear link between Megan and her killer.
And I was just ecstatic. It's hell yeah.
I met with Kelly, and I told her in person, I know who killed your daughter.
Four months after the savage murder of Megan Sharpton, detectives have used cell phone GPS data to prove who killed the 24-year-old nursing student.
That's Donnie Jones.
On the night of the murder, the burner phone, I will refer to it as the murder phone, and Donnie's phone, they were in or about the same location. Timmy's phone is not involved. The murder phone and Megan's phone are talking to one another. And the cell phone records will show they were coming in contact with one another, and then they both stopped where her car was found. And I think at that time is when she was abducted. Using the cell phone data, we was able to show that at first that Donnie was close to the place where we believe she was abducted at. Then that he was close to the place I believe that he killed her at, and then that he was close to where the body was found.
Donnie's family owned several farms in that area, and that's where we felt like that she was murdered.
They gave us permission to search that area, and it's an extremely secluded place.
Investigators make a telling discovery.
There was a burn barrel there that caught my eye. I found a purple scarf with black stars on it. It was later identified by her sister, Carrie, as a gift that she had given Megan. I went from an absolute whodunit to this guy might have done it to, oh, this guy definitely done it.
The overwhelming evidence is what made the DA take that step to indict him.
I was elated. I went to the Coffee County Sheriff's Department and had him brought up, and I arrested him.
On November 5th, 2012, Donnie Jones is charged with first-degree murder, rape, and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping.
One attorney, that was it. He had no more to say.
Never would I have thought it would wind up like this. When Donnie was charged, Mom, she was still pretty overwhelmed, but it was a relief to start learning that we were going to get the details of what events led up to that day.
Based on the evidence collected, investigators pieced together how Donnie lured and then murdered Megan. It paints a disturbing picture of a calculating predator.
So while looking into the murder phone, we started backtracking all the numbers that it had called. And there was a pattern. Everyone that was called with that phone was someone that was sitting with the elderly or doing some kind of nursing in-home service. The murder phone was used just seeking out a victim. Donnie had reached out to Megan. He knew well enough to go in his wife's phone and get her number out, and that's how all this started.
She had known Donnie and his wife, not close friends, but knew them. She answered that call from Donnie.
Megan was on her way to a job that didn't exist. The directions she had got were not good. She had to call our suspect.
He met her, at which time he abducted her and went back to one of the family's farms.
Megan Sharpson's last few minutes of life was pure hell and panic and fear.
He raped her and shot her. Megan was beaten prior to being killed. He moved her from there to where he set her body on fire to try to hide his crimes. And then he went home and acted like nothing happened.
Donnie Jones is just a cold-blooded killer, sexual deviant, cold-blooded killer.
7 months after Megan's murder, Donnie Jones pleads guilty, and on February 4th, 2013, he's sentenced to life without parole.
I feel like there will never be enough done to him. He's sick, he's a monster. There is no reasonable explanation why he did it.
There was a sense of accomplishment that we'd moved so fast in finding out who killed her. Had we not have caught him, he would have reoffended.
Detectives do determine Megan's murder was not connected to the Holly Bobo case.
There was 4 people arrested in the Holly Bobo case. It had nothing to do with my case.
If Megan hadn't lost her life, I feel very confident that Donnie Jones would still be out, trying to trick young women. Megan put him behind bars for life. She sacrificed her life to keep everybody else in our community safe.
Despite getting justice for Megan, the Sharpton family suffers another tragedy just 9 months later in November 2013.
Mom took her life 16 months after Megan's death. Her heart was just incredibly broken, and she made the choice. She wanted to be with Megan.
Yeah, he essentially killed them both. Sure did.
Our family time, that's when I missed her the most. I missed that laugh. If you just heard Meg's laugh, you would be having a much better day. I miss those specific moments, those milestones that she's not gonna get to be a part of.
I thought Megan and I would be friends for, on into adulthood. We were supposed to be together forever, as best friends, as sidekicks. She was not someone you could forget. There was a memorial placed on the side of the road where she was found, and it's this beautiful giant star sculpture. It's very cool, and Megan would absolutely love it.
A loving husband and father with so much to live for.
He did everything for his family. He was an amazing daddy. He loved life. He loved to be happy.
Is ruthlessly gunned down at home in front of his wife.
When he was laying there on the floor, nothing can prepare you for that.
They stood over the victim's body with a shotgun and delivered a fatal blow.
This wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination.
Police tracked down several suspects.
She was absolutely the possible person who was involved. She had all the motive.
He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence.
And we knew that he and the victim had some bad blood between them.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer,
We were pretty frustrated, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
the case takes a mind-blowing turn.
She sang like a songbird.
He had been in possession of the guns used.
And law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
To reveal a killer no one imagined.
This is unbelievable.
It was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
The darkest, blackest soul.
Known for its white sand beaches, Panama City lies on the Gulf Coast of Florida's Panhandle.
Our biggest industry is tourism, with millions of people coming to enjoy the Gulf Coast.
The community is very tight. You know most of your neighbors, you know everybody that you do business with on a personal name basis.
But in the early hours of October 6, 1998, the town's sense of safety is rocked by a chilling 911 call.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a call from a woman that her husband had been shot and killed.
There was a lot of shots. I ran back to the bedroom. The killer wasn't in the house. He was coming after us. I literally thought everybody was gonna die, and I was so scared.
Police raced to the home, expecting to encounter an active shooter.
Their first thought is clearing that house, making sure that the killer's not still in the house.
As the officer entered, the first thing that he noticed was the victim's body in the kitchen area.
When they started calling out that they were the police and they were there, the wife was in a bedroom.
She had retreated to seek safety for her and her children, which were still in the house.
This is all just happening so quickly. I don't know how I'm supposed to trust that whoever's out there is not the killer.
Officers find no sign of the gunman and assure Angelica it's safe to come out of the bedroom.
The wife came out and she was very, very hysterical.
When they walked me back out, when he was laying there on the floor, I knew he was gone. You have somebody murdering your husband and shooting you, all in seconds. Nothing can prepare you for that.
Angelica identifies the man as her husband, 30-year-old Ron Stovall.
The children were taken to Ron's parents' house. They didn't live too far away. And the victim's wife went to the police department where we could talk to her.
With Angelica and the children out of harm's way, detectives can examine the crime scene.
As a responding detective, I go in and start looking around. Ron, the victim, he had been shot 3 times in the back, once in the hip, and there was a shot to the back of the head.
Investigators find an important clue close to the victim's body.
There were some bloody footprints there on the floor. Part of those footprints had what looked like the letter H, 2 H's kind of next to each other on the sole.
Whoever was wearing that shoe had perpetrated at least part of the crime because they would have been standing in the victim's blood and then exiting the residence following the homicide.
The Stovall's front door also reveals how the murder unfolded.
We could see her husband was shot outside, and then the killer shot through the door, and he got into the house, and he had shot Ron in the back of the head.
As daylight breaks, a forensic team scours the outside of the home.
They found a handgun projectile out on the sidewalk near the driveway.
The killer shot what clearly looks like a handgun round to the lower extremities, and then you have a shotgun round to the head. This was overkill. They stood over the body and delivered a fatal blow. When you see that type of crime scene, you're looking immediately for someone that displayed some type of grudge or emotional hatred for the victim.
While forensics wrap up their investigation at the crime scene, detectives head to the police station to speak with Ron's wife, Angelica.
We really took note how emotionally overtaken she was, but she had been an eyewitness to this scene, so she was critical in our investigation.
I can't even comprehend what's going on. He was dead. I did not want to live without him. Ron was truly amazing. He was always full of life. very kind, sincere, very real.
Born in Panama City, Ron Stovall was one of 4 siblings.
He was very close with his family. He was always out doing stuff with school, doing stuff with the church.
He was well known within the community.
Ron served almost 4 years in the Navy. He had felt a commitment to his country and enjoyed his naval service.
Ron always dreamt of having a family, and in 1989, he met his first wife, Tina Trexler.
Tina and Ron got married. They had one child, they had a daughter.
The marriage was a rocky one, and after 6 years, it fell apart. Soon after, Ron met single mom Angelica at a local beach bar.
He said he knew from the second he saw me that he loved me. Our first night, we went on a date, took me to the beach, to the ocean, put out a blanket, listened to some Marvin Gaye, had Italian food. It was very romantic. He stole my heart, and I was never in love before. I just fell right into his arms.
In 1997, the couple married. Just like Ron, Angelica had a child from a previous relationship. A year later, their family of 4 became 5 when they had a daughter of their own.
Ron took on several jobs. He worked as a waiter. He worked as a delivery man for the UPS companies.
He was very dedicated, and he just got his massage therapy license. He did everything for his family. We were very happy.
Who would want to gun down this loving husband and father in cold blood? At the station, Angelica tells police how the murder unfolded.
I was able to tell the cops everything I knew, and I didn't try to hold anything back. Ron got up at about 3 o'clock every morning, and I would get up and make his lunch for him to take to work.
She explains how Ron left the house and was suddenly ambushed.
There were some shots. I didn't know what was going on. He collapsed on the ground, and the killer tried coming through the door, so I was fighting with him. He got his hand through it. I grabbed the gun, and he opened the door with his hand, and I looked down the barrel of that silver gun, and he shot it.
The bullet just misses Angelica.
I ran back to the bedroom.
As Angelica shares more details about the deadly attack, detectives gain important information about the killer.
She described him as male, brown eyes, brown hair, and that he had some type of facial hair, possibly a mustache. She indicated hearing the assailant say to Ron as he was delivering the fatal gunshot wound, "This is for her."
It sounded very evil.
Angelica tells police she doesn't know the meaning behind the killer's words.
We need to find out who her was, and we needed to find out what made this so personal to her.
Well, this wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination, is what it was.
Investigators ask Angelica who might want Ron dead.
Immediately, she went to Tina, his ex-wife. Ms. Stovall indicated that the relationship between Ron and his ex-wife was volatile. There was a custody issue over their daughter.
Things got a little bit more sticky with the custody setup, and Ron was filing for full custody of the child.
Could the bitter custody battle have turned deadly?
This was an enormous red flag for us as a team. Whoever her was may have in fact had to do with his ex-wife.
It's probably one of the worst situations we ever deal with, is with a man and woman and children involved. It will just about make a person do anything.
Coming up, police uncover a key piece of evidence.
He brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene,
leading to a disturbing plot.
The photo identification that made him a prime suspect.
It was his eyes. What I saw was the same person.
And a sickening betrayal no one saw coming.
They planned this whole thing.
None of us had ever worked a case like this.
I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred.
Police investigating the cold-blooded shooting of 30-year-old Ron Stovall are looking into his relationship with his ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
We knew that there was an extreme amount of tension between Ron and his ex-wife, and there was a custody battle that was forthcoming.
Ron and Tina originally shared custody, but Ron had filed a petition basically saying that he wanted full custody of the child.
Up to this point, Tina was that individual that had the most to gain from Ron's death. Perhaps she had not been the one on scene, but it still doesn't eliminate her as having some type of involvement.
This looked like certainly an intentional and a premeditated killing. Might have been a killing for hire.
Detectives speak to Ron's friends and family to get a clearer picture of the animosity with Tina.
When Ron remarried, it was okay, but not really okay. Tina, as well as her family, did not like the new wife, and the situation deteriorated between all of them.
As Ron and Angelica's family grew, Tina's behavior appeared increasingly erratic.
Tina began feeling that Ron was trying to work Tina out of the picture as the mother, and so that had really kind of amplified the rub and the tension.
There was all this, crazy fighting, and it was too hard for his daughter. We were just concerned.
This custody hearing was coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks from when this incident happened.
Tina was absolutely a possible person who was involved in this murder. She had all the motive.
Could the custody battle have driven Ron's ex-wife to murder? Investigators bring Tina in for an interview.
One of the things that was most alarming when we sat down with Tina was that there was no remorse, no emotional activity on her part, that she was even concerned that he was dead.
When investigators ask about her relationship with Ron, Tina's answer is surprising.
We knew there were a lot of hostilities, but when Tina was interviewed, she kind of painted that the relationship with them was cordial, it was friendly. It's a red flag for us as investigators because she's already showing signs of deceit.
With suspicions raised, detectives grilled Tina about her whereabouts in the hours leading up to Ron's murder.
She told us the night before the homicide, she had went to work at a local restaurant. She was a bartender. She got off sometime between 11 and midnight. She had went home and sat and watched TV with her mother. Then after that she had went to bed, and at the time of the homicide itself, she had been home asleep.
Before police can press Tina further, the interview is interrupted.
Her mother had hired a lawyer for her.
The attorney made contact with Tina and immediately ended the interview.
Unable to finish questioning Tina, detectives look into her alibi.
Police were able to establish that she had been at work that night till 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Investigators also speak with Tina's mother, Ann Trexler.
She was the grandmotherly type and was helping Tina get back on her feet and help her get through this divorce.
And come across as a very down-to-earth, nice lady, a housewife, and she confirmed that Tina had been at the house with her watching TV.
Though Tina's alibi checks out, police still theorize that she could have hired someone to kill her ex-husband.
We conducted a preliminary investigation into her financial records. Everything was consistent with that of just a working-class individual making normal purchases.
1 week into the investigation with no concrete evidence pointing at Tina, police look for other suspects. They quickly discover Tina wasn't the only one in a dispute with Ron.
Tina had a boyfriend. His name was Adrian Harris, and there had been some confrontations between Ron and Mr. Harris regarding the way Ron was treating Tina. And in fact, at one point, there had been some threats made on Harris's part.
Had Adrian decided to confront Ron, leading to deadly consequences.
As we began looking into Mr. Harris, whether he was paid to do it or whether he did it on his own, we weren't sure, but the concern was that he may have perpetrated this to make good with Tina for the purpose of helping her.
Investigators tracked down Adrian over 900 miles away near Baltimore.
When we talked with Adrian, he did acknowledge that there was some bad blood between the two of them, but he really kind of downplayed the significance.
The day of the murder, he told us he went to work
He had clocked in before 7:30, and the time of Ron's death was 3:30 in the morning.
Detectives checked travel times between Baltimore and Panama City.
There was not enough time to get to Panama City from several states away to do the murder and go back home.
While Adrian is ruled out, someone close by catches the investigators' attention.
We talked to his roommate, Guy McInville.
When the officers went to talk to Adrian's roommate, they discovered the description of the killer that Angelica gave to the law enforcement. The roommate fitted quite well.
Guy McInville had brown eyes, brown hair, and he had a mustache. Now we had another individual that we want to look at.
Once we saw him, Guy fit the description. He was a roommate with Adrian Harris, and we knew that Harris and the victim had some bad blood between them. We thought maybe he went there to kill him.
Is this the break police have been hoping for? Investigators rush to confirm if Guy is a true match for the gunman.
We got pictures of him to show the victim's wife, Angelica. See if he could have been the one that she saw that night.
Back in Panama City, detectives include the picture of Guy into a photo lineup.
Angelica was an essential witness.
She was a witness who can identify the individual that did the crime. Her photographic identification, it was surprising.
It has been 2 weeks since 30-year-old father, Ron Stovall, was shot to death at home in front of his wife, Angelica. Now, detectives hope she can identify the shooter from a photo lineup.
She picked out Guy McInville as being the killer.
It was his eyes. There was something very, very similar. What I saw was the same person.
There was an identification of Guy McInville that made him a prime suspect.
We have Miss Stovall's positive identification of Guy as the individual that was in front of their house. There's a sense of relief that begins to sweep through the unit because you're finally on to a really developing hot lead. We want to now try to establish what type of physical evidence do we actually have between the victim, Ron, and Guy.
Detectives get a search warrant and race over to Guy's Baltimore residence. They make a telling discovery.
We search his items, and looking at me right square in the face was a pair of shoes consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. So we're moving in the right direction.
Police bring Guy to the local police station for questioning.
Although we still were missing the key pieces of evidence, the guns and such as that, we really felt like we're starting to put together the edges of the puzzle. In speaking with Guy, what he provided us for an alibi was that he was in Maryland working. At the end of work, he went home, slept. The next day he got up, went to work, and so that was his alibi.
Detectives check out Guy's story.
We had had an opportunity to speak with Guy at his place of employment, and we were able to collect some video that correlated with his timeline of what he said. There was physically no way possible for him to have been here in Panama City at the time of the crime.
It turned out that what Guy McInville said to the police was correct. Guy had an alibi.
Eager to further prove his innocence, Guy volunteers to take a polygraph.
He successfully passed that. So we were able to clear Mr. McInville.
For police, it's a disappointing setback.
We were pretty frustrated, and it's a roller coaster. It's one of those, now you're back in the lows again, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
Angelica wanted to help the officers along, but her perception at the time of the event was clouded by the terror, the trauma of the incident itself.
I remember him being the same person. It stuck in my head like that, but I was wrong.
It's difficult when you see something that quick that you can say, okay, this is the individual that did the crime.
We thought we had this thing solved, but you just got to go regroup, see what you still have to do, and you just start from there.
Desperate for new leads, investigators review Ron's autopsy report.
The autopsy confirmed 2 different weapons. They told us that it was a .357 round that he had been shot with, plus the shotgun shell. One big thing we learned was that shotgun residue got in his face. We think that Ron was laying there on the floor, and this guy's saying this is for her, and he presses that shotgun to the back of his head, and Ron's looking at him when that went off.
The forensics report contains another crucial detail that could lead police to the killer.
These were close proximity rounds, and so we knew that this was something personal. And the shotgun shell was paramount. It was a unique round. We would be able to identify it. So that was a plus in our corner.
Detectives shared details of the firearms with local law enforcement, hoping to track down their owner.
We work so closely with the different police departments in the area. We talk to them all the time in case something turns up.
As investigators continue to search for answers, Ron's loved ones struggle with their grief.
The best thing in my life was that life. I didn't think I was strong enough to go through anything without him. He was always full of life. Losing your soulmate, you can't even explain how much pain that was. It still is. It'll never go away.
3 weeks after Ron's murder, the investigation is threatening to grow cold, but then police receive a tip that reignites the case.
We got a call from the Panama City Beach Police Department. They had a home invasion out there on the beach. During that arrest, they recovered 2 handguns and a short-barreled shotgun.
They knew from the investigation of the crime scene where Ron Stovall was killed that a shotgun had been used and that a handgun had been used.
That coincides with what we're looking for. We wanted to go over the evidence they had and the circumstances.
Could these be the weapons connected to Ron's murder?
The gentleman that they arrested, we started looking into him and looking at his background and everything. And he had a pretty lengthy criminal history, had actually been linked to some murders in the past. He really caught our attention. This turned out to be a big break.
Police in Panama City are investigating the cold-blooded homicide of husband and father Ron Stovall. They now believe the missing murder weapons were used in a home invasion robbery less than 15 miles away.
When meeting with this investigator from the Beach Police Department, what he produced from his crime scene was this: a handgun and a sawed-off shotgun. That coincides with what we're looking for. Then he brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene. We have everything that meets the parameters. Now we really believe we're on the right path.
The weapons are sent off to the crime lab. While detectives await the results, they dig deeper into this new lead.
At the Beach Police Department, they identified the individual as Tony Alberto Perez. He went by Tony. He had an extensive criminal history. There was some acts of violence in his past, or some drugs in his past. They really felt like he was a pretty violent individual.
Another detail catches their attention.
Tony had brown eyes, brown hair, and facial hair. He looks just like our guy. He met Miss Stovall's physical description to a T.
Investigators head to the nearby jail where Tony is being held for the home invasion.
He come across as a kind of a likable guy. He was laughing and cutting up, but the more he talked, more red flags went up. He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence. He was completely nonchalant about it.
Detectives turn up the heat and ask Tony if he killed Ron Stovall.
Tony totally denied any involvement, any knowledge of Ron, any knowledge of anything that may have happened on that date, and basically told law enforcement, it's not me, I'm not the person.
Despite Tony's denials, investigators believe he's withholding information, and they obtain a search warrant.
Tony Perez had items that he owned stored at the landlord's house, and we're searching through Tony Perez's items over there. And then we find a pair of work boot type shoes.
While inspecting the footwear, detectives notice a key detail.
Those work boots had what looked like the letter H, two H's kind of next to each other on the sole. It looked like what we had found at the crime scene. And we got those sent right off to the lab.
As police hunt for more incriminating evidence against Tony, the ballistic results come back.
And we actually got confirmation from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that the guns collected that Tony had been in possession of matched perfectly ballistically to the rounds that we had recovered from our scene.
That evidence right there is one of the biggest things you could have in any murder case. You can find the weapons and find a person who has the weapons. That's major.
So now that we can put Tony, or at least the guns, at the scene, that gave us the ability to change gears with Tony. We had the information and ammunition that we needed to confront Tony about what really happened.
Detectives head back to the jail to interview their prime suspect.
As Tony began to kind of spin his version of what happened to Ron, now he acknowledged having a little knowledge of it, but he said that he had loaned his guns to someone else and that he didn't know what they did with them. He didn't have any involvement in it. But what he says is that he had heard Ron was dealing drugs, and that's why he was killed.
We had already done a thorough background on Ron. We knew Ron was not involved in any drug business. We had talked to too many people. He was a happily married man trying to make it in life. That's what Ron was.
Then Tony gave us information that would kind of put us on some individuals that might be involved, and we tracked those individuals down, and we were able to confirm 100% that they had nothing to do with Ron's death.
People sometimes, when they are being questioned, especially when the police have some of the goods on them, will make up stories. And that's what Perez did. As far as the police could determine, that was a total concoction by Tony Perez.
Detectives believe Tony is lying, but wonder what motive he could have to kill Ron.
We were still kind of struggling to establish how Tony would have came into Ron's life.
Going through Tony's belongings, we found some cell phone bills there, and they were linked to the name of Kim Miller. Kim Miller turned out to be Tony's girlfriend. So we went to talk to Kim.
Kim Miller is the owner of a Panama City hair salon.
Tony and Kimberly, they had been in a romantic relationship for several months.
We were told by Kim that Tony, he was doing odd things for her. He would come around the hair salon and he would actually shampoo customers' hair, clean up, sweep up the shop, things like that.
Investigators look for a connection between Tony and Ron Stovall.
Kim was familiar with the Stovall homicide. She claims that she first heard about it because she had a customer that had called in and canceled her hair appointment, saying how her ex-son-in-law had been murdered.
When detectives ask Kim for the customer's name, they receive a startling response.
The connection kind of came out of nowhere and almost as a surprise.
Kim's client is Ann Trexler, who happens to be Tina's mother. Tina, Ron's ex-wife.
Police believe husband and father Ron Stovall was shot and killed by criminal Tony Perez. They're now exploring a potential link between Tony and Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
When Kim Miller indicated that she styled Tina's mother, Ann Trexler's hair, and law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
Ann Trexler is the mother of Ron's ex-wife, Tina.
We knew of the ongoing hostilities between Ron and Tina. So when we talked with Kim Miller, we asked her if she had ever met Tina, his ex-wife, and she did met her on a couple of occasions. Tina's mother, Ann, however, was a regular client, was in there on a regular basis.
With Tina previously eliminated from the investigation, detectives ask Kim more about Tina's mother, 52-year-old Ann Trexler.
She told us that Ann's talking to her and telling her about these problems with her daughter going through this custody battle with her ex-husband. And she was upset about it. She's afraid she's going to lose her grandchild.
Ann had told Kimberly the Trexlers had to get a second mortgage on their home to provide legal assistance to Tina.
Could the custody battle be the motive behind Ron's murder?
At that point, we were trying to determine exactly who she was. She hadn't really been on our radar at all. We knew that she was Tina's mom. We knew that she was Tina's alibi at the time of this crime.
Ann Trexler, no criminal history, supposedly a wonderful grandmother and fine Christian lady who would never be involved in something like this.
Investigators contact Ron's wife, Angelica, and learn his custody dispute with Tina brought out a different side to his former mother-in-law.
Apparently they had a good relationship when Tina and them were married, but it was just a constant battle over visitation rights. It was just such a fight with her.
Looking to see if Ann could have anything to do with Ron's murder, detectives bring her in for an interview.
When we talked to her, she stated to us that there was no way that she had anything to do with killing him. She did not want him dead. Matter of fact, she said she loved him. And then Ann Trexler wanted a lawyer. And once they get a lawyer, you're done talking.
So we're kind of getting a heightened sense of concern as far as her involvement in the case, because she decided to basically not cooperate with the investigation.
Having hit a wall with Ann, detectives get a breakthrough when forensics results arrive.
We got confirmation that Tony's boot was consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. Also, Tony had been in possession of the guns used. Now you've got a personal item putting him at the crime scene. At that point, we knew we had our shooter.
That's a big piece of evidence right there.
We were able to go back to Tony and present him with what we knew.
He admitted killing Ron. His very words were, "Okay, I did it." It's the shortest confession to a murder I've ever taken in my career.
Investigators push Tony to reveal how the crime unfolded, and what he tells them is shocking.
Tony told us that Ann Trexler wanted to have her ex-son-in-law killed and was willing to pay to have it done. When we found out Ann Trexler wanted to hire somebody to kill Ron, I mean, this is unbelievable. Ex-mother-in-law gonna get involved and have pay somebody to kill her ex-son-in-law?
He had met Ann at the hair salon. She was complaining about Ron, and that the two of them had worked out a deal for Tony to kill Ron in exchange for about $10,000 to be paid to Tony.
On November 10, 1998, Tony is charged with the first-degree murder of Ron Stovall. But the case is far from over. Detectives turn their attention back to alleged mastermind Ann Trexler. Searching for answers, detectives pull Ann's phone records.
The phone records were a treasure trove of information. They showed a lot of phone traffic between Kim Miller and Antonio Perez and Ann Trexler.
It clearly looks like Kimberly was the middle person between Ann and Tony.
There were phone calls between the Trexler house and Kim Miller at strange hours of the night for strange amounts of time that could not be explained away by saying, "We're setting up our rinse and set." Another thing, we were able to show that Ann Trexler received a phone call from Kim Miller the morning right after Ron's death. So there were links to tie Ann Trexler to this plot, but there was no hard, concrete connection of evidentiary value. We needed something else that would show that Ann, in fact, had hired Antonio Perez to kill Ron Stovall.
Tony Perez, he says that he had come to an agreement with Ann Trexler to kill Ron for $10,000.
Detectives scour Ann's financial records for any signs she had commissioned Ron's murder.
We have withdrawals from her banking accounts that coincide with when Tony says he was paid and the amount that he was paid. So now we have proof that what Tony's telling us is accurate regarding being paid. With regards to Ann, none of us had ever worked a case like this. So it was kind of a shock that all of these pieces were kind of lining up to support she is the motivation to this entire crime.
But we felt like we still could not make the case against Dan Trexler. We needed someone to corroborate what Tony Perez said. We needed somebody else that can draw the line between the money and the murder of Ron Stovall.
We have to go back to the middleman in the case, which is Kim Miller.
She's the whole key to this thing.
She was looking at criminal charges, but without her, we're not going to get Ann. She is the only way that we're going to have true accounts of what happened.
We went and picked up Kim Miller and brought her in.
Kim Miller, she stonewalled. She said, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm not telling you anything.
Investigators working the Ron Stovall homicide have charged shooter Tony Perez with murder and believe the mastermind is Ron's former mother-in-law, Ann Trexler. But to build an ironclad case, they need Tony's girlfriend and go-between, Kim Miller, to share what she knows. However, Kim is refusing to talk.
It really wasn't until we actually laid out in front of her the phone records and drew the lines between Ann and her and Tony that we were able to convince her to cooperate with the investigation.
We let her know, she was going to be charged with accessory to the murder, and she's facing life in prison.
Prosecutors offer Kim a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against Ann Trexler. Eventually, Kim takes the deal.
Kim sang like a songbird.
Kimberly was very adamant that there was a deep-seated hatred for Ron on Ann Trexler's part.
She indicated that on many occasions, Van Trexler ranted and raved about Ron Stovall, how bad he was, that he was going to remove her granddaughter. She wished that somebody would take him out, and it got more and more. Finally, Kim said, okay, if you're really serious, I know somebody who might help you.
Kim lets her know that her boyfriend, Tony Perez, will get rid of him for $10,000. And that's how the deal came about.
Kim then reveals how in the early hours of October 6th, Tony drove to the Stovall house to lie in wait for Ron.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, when Ron went out to his vehicle, Tony took a shot at him with a pistol. And Ron ran inside and slammed the door behind him, and Tony Perez fired more shots, which struck Ron in the back.
To finish Ron off, Tony tried to force his way inside the house.
Angelica, she tried to hold the door, and Tony Perez fired a shot that almost struck her. She ran to the other room to call 911.
Tony Perez came in, and he found Ron on the floor and walked up with a shotgun, said, this is for her. Boom. He killed Ron Stovall right there.
When he made the statement, this is for her, it's our belief that Tony was doing this on Ann's behalf.
Tony came there to do one thing, and that was to kill Ron Stovall.
Once he had made his getaway, he was able to reach out to Kimberly and make notice to her that, in fact, the job had been done. And then, of course, she notified Ann.
Kim swears Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler, wasn't involved in their murderous plan.
Law enforcement looked at Tina Trexler. Her mother, Ann, may have confided in her, but no one could get to that much evidence to put Tina in the situation of taking Ron's life.
Ann Trexler, she tried to be the grandmotherly type, but she planned this whole thing.
Ann Trexler's thought pattern was Ron Stovall is getting ready to take my only precious granddaughter away from me, and I won't have visitation, and he left my daughter, he married somebody else. He should not be able to get away with this.
From an investigator's perspective, Ann carried just as much weight as Tony. Without Ann, Tony would not have even known who Ron Stovall was.
On February 15th, 2000, Ann Trexler is formally charged with the murder of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall.
And the cops called and he said, got her, she's in jail. She is morbidly evil. The darkest, blackest soul ever. And then she'll put on a face like she's just Miss Innocent. The killer, he didn't know Ron and knew Ron. I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred in their body, in their mind, in their heart.
In court, shooter Tony Perez pleads guilty and is sentenced to life without parole. In February 2000, Kim Miller is sentenced to 5 years probation as part of her deal with prosecutors. Finally, in 2001, Ann's trial begins, and she pleads not guilty.
Ann Trexler took the stand. She testified about not being involved. She testified about her concerns of her grandchild and the fact that she had absolutely no involvement.
On May 14th, 2001, the jury finds Ann Trexler guilty of first-degree murder. She's sentenced to life in prison without parole.
There's a little piece. I'm in a little piece in this horrible thing. A little justice, I guess.
Gets a little emotional sometimes. It's not just me. You know, we're a whole team working this thing. We celebrated, I'll just say that. We celebrated this.
The most striking thing to me is that these are all ordinary people. And it's a little bit frightening to think that people who are walking around living everyday, ordinary lives would be capable of this.
The one that initiated it all was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
For Ron's family, his loss continues to be deeply felt.
I miss him and I love him so much. My poor daughter, she never got the honor she deserved. She never got her daddy. We celebrate his life all the time. He loved life. He loved to be happy. And I've tried so hard to keep his memory alive. Very much so. I will never forget how amazing Ron was.
A charming and spirited young mother.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Is found strangled in her bedroom.
Whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
Police face a challenging crime scene.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses.
This case was a definite whodunit case.
And a long list of suspects.
He had been hanging around her desk and he had made some comments that really creeped her out.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done. Their relationship was over.
You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Until one big break reveals a culprit.
That one key piece of evidence was the aha moment in the case.
And it shocks everyone.
When they finally discovered who it was just surreal.
There's no rhyme, there's no reason behind it. It was absolutely senseless.
Just before 5 p.m. on a Monday in March of 1999, in the small bedroom community of Norcross, Georgia, police raced through the suburban streets in response to a 911 call.
The only information that we had at hand initially was there had been a person discovered dead in an apartment. It was her fiance that had called 911. When we arrived at the scene, we spoke with the fiance briefly.
The man tells detectives the victim is 20-year-old mother of one, Danielle Jennings. Her 2-year-old son is currently at daycare.
The fiance told us he walked in and found her lying on the bed, and he stated that she was cold and blue.
She was deceased by that point. She was face down on the bed, and he rolled her over and then called 911.
While Danielle's fiance is taken to provide a statement, investigators take a close look at the crime scene.
When you went back into the bedroom, she was on the bed, fully clothed, laying on her back, but you could obviously see signs of strangulation.
She had a ligature around her neck. The ligature appeared to be some type of stocking, and it was tied around her neck very, very tight.
It had been tied off to leave it that way. It's not like it released, which I thought was pretty unusual. I mean, whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
The ligature was knotted in the back, which would tell you that the person was on her back, behind her, when she was strangled.
Detectives explore the rest of the crime scene, looking for clues.
The bed was messed up. One of the dresser drawers was open. The stocking that she was strangled with may have been one of hers out of that drawer. Her purse was dumped out as if somebody had dumped the contents and rummaged through it. It could have been a robbery or a burglary just gone wrong. However, there was other stuff such as cameras, miscellaneous jewelry that could have been taken, but they were not taken.
It was possibly a burglary that had been interrupted, but you always have to consider the possibility that it could have been a staged burglary because, frankly, there really wasn't a lot of disruption.
Next, investigators try to determine how the killer entered the apartment.
There was absolutely no tool marks or anything on the front door, and then there was a sliding patio glass door. It was locked. There was no evidence of tampering with it at all. We went around and we searched the outside, but we didn't turn up anything of any value.
Before they return to the station to interview Danielle's fiance, detectives fan out to speak with other tenants in the complex.
Most of the people in these complexes work during the day, and so most of them are not home. We left our business cards with a note asking them to please give us a call.
As the crime scene investigation continues, news of Danielle's violent murder quickly spreads to her family and friends.
When I found out that Danielle died, I said, no, you've got to be kidding me. I said, this cannot be real. And then I dropped the phone and I just started screaming. I was just absolutely in utter shock. How does one handle the information that your best friend, your sister, the person that you basically love more than anybody in this world is gone? Why would somebody do this to such a loving, caring, beautiful person?
Born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1978, Danielle grew up with her mother and stepfather in Stockton, Georgia. Even in her youth, Danielle had a magnetic personality.
She was beautiful, strong, tenacious, ferocious. She was very fun. Danielle was always ready to have a good time, to laugh.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was very tiny, but she had this big attitude. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Danielle showed her resilience when she was left to deal with an unplanned pregnancy alone at the age of 16.
There was never a doubt in her mind that she wanted to have that baby. She wasn't scared. I mean, she had brass balls of steel.
She wasn't going to let her age stand in the way of being a good mother.
Danielle gave birth to her son, Tristan, in 1996.
She was so proud. I could see her little attitude in him.
The new mother longed for her son to have a father and hoped she had found one when she started dating Luis Payano.
We grew up with Luis, so we go way back with him. We met Luis in our early teen years. Danielle was always partial to Luis, and Luis and Danielle were dating, and I was so thrilled. And the way that Luis would look at Danielle, like she would walk into the room and he would just light up.
Soon, the couple moved into an apartment together, and Danielle landed an office job at a landscaping company.
She was so excited to have like what we titled a big girl job. She was very proud of herself. We were all very proud of her, you know? She was going places.
In December of 1998, Luis asked Danielle to marry him.
She was so excited, and I'm like, this is gonna be the best marriage ever. When Danielle first got her engagement ring, it was too big. And I said, girl, you gotta get it sized. She's like, I don't wanna take it off. It was beautiful.
Danielle had everything going for her. She had a great career opportunity ahead of her. She had a man she was so excited to marry. She had a beautiful son that just meant the world to her. Danielle was really on top of her game.
She was probably the happiest I had ever seen her.
Now, all Danielle's happiness and hope has been stolen by a cold-blooded killer.
I could not even begin to fathom why somebody would do that to her.
Back at the crime scene, investigators are searching for answers.
The scene raised several questions. Of course, the most obvious was, how did whoever it was get into the apartment? Because there was no sign of forced entry. Was it someone she knew? We know, working off the percentages, that the person most likely to kill you is laying next to you in the bed. In this case, Danielle's fiance, Luis.
Coming up, detectives unearth dark secrets.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He was violent. He was abusive. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad.
He was just very, very creepy to me. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
The person that did it could have been amongst us.
And just as the case threatens to turn cold,
we felt like we had hit a brick wall.
I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it.
A stunning revelation points to a killer no one suspected.
The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought. I don't think anybody saw it coming.
Police investigating the murder of 20-year-old mother Danielle Jennings have their first suspect, her fiancé, 25-year-old Luis Payano.
Even though he's her fiance, everybody remains a suspect until such time that we solve the crime.
Investigators question the distraught young man.
He was very emotional, but romance can raise anger to a level sometimes that leads to homicide.
Detectives begin their interview by asking Luis about Danielle's movements the day of her murder.
He stated that he had been at work all day. The last time he had seen Danielle was when he left to go to work.
According to Luis, they had both left the apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle went back into the building to get something. He tells detectives that Danielle seemed distracted because of an upcoming work meeting.
She was supposed to be having a meeting with management that day. She didn't feel easy about it.
Luis says Danielle called him at work around 11:30 a.m.
She wanted to see if Luis would have lunch with her, but he was tied up at work and he couldn't break free.
They didn't have lunch, and later in the afternoon, he couldn't reach her.
He called her at work, and then they told him that she had gone home at lunchtime, but she didn't come back from lunch after a couple of hours.
Luis tells investigators he called Danielle's cell phone and their apartment.
He stated that he was trying to get hold of Danielle and was not getting a response, and then he left work and went home to see if she was there.
Luis said that when he got home, the front door was unlocked, and that really surprised him because they were pretty careful about keeping the front door locked.
Detectives ask Luis about his relationship with Danielle.
We wanted to find out if they had domestic issues. He said that it was a very good relationship and they were very much in love with each other.
To verify his story, detectives call Luis's work and Danielle's loved ones.
Her family and friends stated that they were just a young couple that were very much in love and looking forward to getting married and spending their life together.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past, but Luis was on the up and up. I mean, he was setting up a financially stable life for him and Danielle and Tristan, and she loved him so much.
Danielle's friends are adamant that Luis would never harm her, and his alibi seems solid.
We were able to confirm that he had been at work all day through statements of his coworkers. As a result, he was eliminated as a suspect. Now you're on the hunt for other suspects.
With Luis in the clear, detectives ask him if he knew of anyone who may want to harm Danielle.
He brought up the name of Jeff, a co-worker of Danielle. She had filed a sexual harassment complaint against him at work. That piqued our interest a little bit. We immediately went to Danielle's place of work and we met with her supervisor and discussed what was going on.
Danielle's supervisor tells detectives about the young mother's harassment complaint against her coworker.
He was a middle-aged man. He worked at the same landscape company. He had a different job. He was in management. Danielle told her manager and supervisor he had been hanging around her desk and he had made some comments that really kind of creeped her out and acting inappropriately at work.
There was a big age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40, she was 20. He had asked her out for lunch, and she told him that she had a fiance that she loved, and he had made a comment to her that if he was 20 years younger, things would be a lot different.
Danielle had briefly touched base with me about the situation that she was having at work. Dude was kind of crushing on her, and she was trying to get that, under control. But I said, just don't let it get out of hand.
She filed the complaint. I kind of admired her grit. She wasn't going to take it. The company was very responsive to her complaint. They took it seriously. They moved quickly.
Detectives note the timing when told of the company's response.
That day that Danielle was killed, she was supposed to be having a meeting with upper management about the sexual harassment charge.
Once we realized that the meeting had taken place that day, that was something that was suspicious.
Talking with the management, we found out Danielle was anxious and nervous about the meeting.
She was a relatively new employee when she made the complaint. That was one of the reasons she was so nervous, because his career was in a certain amount of jeopardy.
Coworkers state that after the meeting, Danielle went home for lunch, but never returned.
She didn't come back, and we knew that was consistent with the time of death. You had to think, where was the coworker at the time?
Detective suspicions increase when they learn that Jeff was out of the office and did not return until late in the day. Was this too much of a coincidence? Could he have killed Danielle as revenge for her complaint?
We definitely wanted to speak with him face to face.
Detectives hunting the killer of Danielle Jennings suspect a harassment complaint against her coworker, Jeff, may have led to retaliation and murder.
We were now focused on him as a possible suspect. We had to consider the possibility that he followed her home and ambushed her and killed her.
Investigators bring the 40-year-old in for an interview and ask about his interaction with 20-year-old Danielle.
He admitted to asking her out for lunch, but he said other than that, he had not done anything.
He talked about the sexual harassment complaint and pretty typically said, you know, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I didn't know she was that offended.
According to police reports, Jeff denies any sexual intentions toward Danielle.
He told police that whatever lapse in manners that he had had with Danielle, that he liked her. He seemed to be genuinely dismayed to find out what had happened.
Detectives ask if Danielle's complaint gave him a reason to want to harm her.
His first reaction was he was angry. He was adamant that he was not a suspect. And then he said it couldn't have been me because my truck was broken and I was on a job with somebody else, with a coworker, and I can prove it.
Jeff provides investigators with the name of the coworker he claims to have been with.
We immediately ran down his coworker at like 1 o'clock in the morning. This guy verified that he was with him all day till the close of business. They were together.
With his alibi confirmed, police eliminate Jeff as a suspect. 24 hours after Danielle's murder, the enormity of her death is only just starting to hit home for Danielle's loved ones.
Things like that didn't happen where we grew up. I could not believe somebody would do that to her. It was just the most nightmarish thing I could imagine. It made me question God. Why would you let something that horrible happen to her?
I didn't want to accept it. I couldn't sleep. I just kept saying, she's dead, she's dead. Danielle should not be dead.
The following day, investigators receive the autopsy report and scour it for anything that might point to Danielle's killer.
The manner of death was asphyxiation or strangulation.
The medical examiner stated that she probably lost consciousness within about 15 to 20 seconds after the ligature was placed around her neck.
It seemed clear that she had been surprised by her attacker, had no time to move, had no time to strike back.
It's almost like it came out of nowhere. We knew from the positioning of the knot, someone had come up behind her with the nylon stocking, pulled it tight until she lost consciousness, and then tied it off to kill her. She had not been sexually assaulted. There weren't any other injuries. There weren't any defensive injuries.
This case was a definite whodunit case. There was no evidence found at the scene that could help us.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No transfer of skin, no fingerprints, nothing a lab could look at.
After striking out with the autopsy, investigators revisit the theory that the homicide was a robbery gone wrong.
We don't live there, so we don't know what's supposed to be there and what's not. We asked the fiance to go back through the apartment with us and tell us what he sees missing. The smallest detail sometimes helps point us into the direction of a suspect, but nothing was missing according to the fiance. At that point, we had absolutely nothing to go on other than the stocking that she was strangled with.
Detectives ask Luis if he recognizes the stocking.
We wanted to know whether it came from her. It was a tan, knee-high women's stocking, and he said that she never wore anything like that, and we didn't find any in the apartment. Whoever did this brought that with them.
The homicide was brutal, violent, and vicious. It lent itself to a personal motive. You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Louise told us she had had some tumultuous relationships in her past, so we pursued that angle.
Investigators asked Danielle's friends about her previous relationships.
When they first started questioning me, they were asking me a lot of questions about her boyfriends in the past, who I felt might have been able to do it. And then it clicked that, Eddie, he was a tow truck driver and he was a big guy. and he was just very, very creepy to me.
Her best friend told us about her ex-boyfriend. He was violent, he was abusive.
She ended up having to get a restraining order on him. With Eddie, no one ever really knew when he was going to pop up again.
That was somebody we needed to look at.
Two days after the murder of 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, friends have alerted investigators to Eddie McElwaney, an ex-boyfriend with a violent history.
We learned a lot about her former boyfriend. We learned that she had begun to see him when she was a teenager, when she was younger.
Friends reveal Danielle started dating Eddie shortly after she became pregnant from another relationship. But Eddie's behavior soon raised red flags.
As they got more serious, he became more possessive and controlling, and he definitely wanted to start isolating her from her friends and family more.
I didn't want to be around him. I did not like the way he made me feel. I didn't like the way he looked at Danielle. I mean, he would sometimes look at her with disgust. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
We learned it had been an abusive relationship, physical and emotional.
I mean, she would stand up to anybody, but as tough and as a badass as she was, I think she was a little bit afraid of him.
Things only got worse with Eddie when Danielle gave birth to her child.
Her family and friends stated that shortly after her son was born, Eddie was getting involved in drugs, and that was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and she ended the relationship with that.
Danielle moved out and tried to start fresh, but Eddie had other plans.
She knew it was going to be difficult, but she didn't realize that Eddie was not going to leave Danielle in peace. He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done, their relationship was over. She never knew when he would turn up around the corner, when she just wanted to be left alone.
She had gotten a restraining order against Eddie because he had been stalking her. He had been driving back and forth in front of her house. He had gone to her work, and she was in fear that she was in danger.
We found out that he had violated the restraining order several times. He would call her, leave voicemails for her. He would drive by her house several times a day or night.
When police ask when Eddie last contacted Danielle, the answer is troubling.
Danielle's family had told us that within the last few months, he had been calling her, trying to get her to talk to him, but she would just hang up on him.
Could Eddie have shown up at Danielle's apartment the day she was killed, leading to a deadly confrontation?
I've seen a lot of domestic abuse cases, so I knew that there was a possibility that with his past, that he could have done something like that.
Investigators track down Eddie and bring him in for questioning.
In the interview with Eddie, he was kind of belligerent and unhappy to be there and a little bit hostile. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad. What we saw with Eddie certainly had all the earmarks of a domestic violence case.
When questioned about his relationship with Danielle, Eddie's responses raised detective suspicions even more.
When he was asked about the relationship, his version was a little bit different. He never mentioned any abuse. He thought everything was great.
We asked him when was the last time that he had had any contact with Danielle, and he said that he had not talked to her for at least a year or longer. We know that he's lying about that. From speaking with Danielle's family and friends, we knew in the last several months he had been calling her.
At that point, he's looking pretty good. So you have to determine where he was at the time of the crime.
Eddie tells detectives that he was working many miles away from where Danielle was killed.
He said that on his job as a tow truck driver that he had to go out of state.
Investigators immediately look into Eddie's alibi.
His boss verified that he was out of state, and he was able to produce hotel receipts, gas receipts. That showed that he was actually out of state at the time of the crime.
Whenever he responded to a legitimate call, he had to log it, and his whereabouts could be verified throughout the day.
That is a pretty tight alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect.
It's another dead end for detectives.
Once again, we're knocked for a loop and we're back to ground zero, and he moves down the line and we're looking for somebody else.
It was infuriating. It was frustrating. I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it, because people get away with murder every day. I was really hoping that the detectives would find something, because you're sitting here trying to point a finger at somebody that you don't know who.
There was this air of suspense around everything because we didn't know at that time who had killed Danielle. The person that did it could have been amongst us.
We had basically eliminated everybody who was close to the victim. When you get to that point of an investigation, you don't have anywhere else to logically follow up.
With no more leads, the investigation is at a standstill.
We felt like we had hit a brick wall, and then we got a call that changed everything.
Three days after finding Danielle Jennings strangled in her apartment bedroom, police hunting her killer have just got a stunning new lead.
We received a phone call from a Miss Kirk that resided at the apartment complex.
The woman tells detectives about a disturbing incident that took place a week before Danielle was killed.
She was awakened one morning by someone knocking at the door, and she looked out the peephole but didn't see anybody there, so she went back to bed. And a few minutes later, she hears the front door open, and the maintenance man is standing there. The maintenance man says that he's there for a work order. However, Miss Kirk says she felt very uncomfortable the entire time that he was in there because he was always staring at her, like he was more preoccupied with her than he was completing the work order.
The woman cannot provide the name of the maintenance man, but she gives a description to police. Detectives head back to Danielle's apartment complex to investigate.
While speaking with the management at the complex, we found that there was another case similar in the past from a Miss Bruno that lived in the apartment complex.
Management told the detectives that someone had walked into this woman's apartment. She had, of course, asked him who the heck he was. What are you doing in my apartment? And he said maintenance, and claimed that he was there to change light bulbs. And she said, I don't have any light bulbs to change. He kind of mumbled and stumbled, and then, maybe I have the wrong apartment, and he backed out and left. It was so similar to the other one, which of course raises our eyebrows.
The complex was big enough so that there were several maintenance workers, but only one closely fit the description given by the young ladies. That would be Calvin Oliver.
We showed a photograph of Mr. Oliver to Miss Bruno and Miss Kirk, and both of them identified him as the person that had walked in on them.
Investigators discover a disturbing trend emerged after Calvin had been hired 7 months ago.
Come to find out, there had been several burglaries reported where items had been stolen out of apartments that had no forced entry.
Could Calvin have been responsible for these thefts?
We learned that he had an apartment in the complex. The fact that he lives there makes it so accessible that he could walk around, not be suspicious. We also learned that the custodians had access to the master keys of every apartment. He has complete access.
Detectives search for any link between Danielle and Calvin.
We found out that he had done a work order in her apartment a couple of weeks prior to the murder.
That is somebody that you really want to look at. It went back to our original theory of if this was a burglary, then it had been interrupted. He could have known that Danielle Jennings was gone during the daytime, and he decided that day that he was going to enter that apartment.
Investigators haul Calvin Oliver in for an interview, but make the call to slow play their suspicions.
When Oliver was brought in for questioning, we didn't want to tip him off to anything about the homicide. So he was interviewed initially about the burglaries. He absolutely denied any of that. He said, I didn't steal anything, I didn't go into apartments. He denied any involvement in any burglaries.
The 42-year-old tells detectives that his intrusion on the two women in the complex was a simple misunderstanding.
Once we got around to interviewing him about the murder, the first question was, did you hear about this? It was kind of odd. You would have thought that a person who worked in that apartment complex and was there every day would have heard everything about it. He went, yeah, I think I heard something about it. I don't know much about it. I don't know that woman.
He insisted he knew nothing about, as he described her, that dead girl.
All he admitted to knowing her was that he had done the work order in her apartment.
At that point, we had a pattern of conduct going into apartments. We had the admission that he had been in the apartment, but we had nothing that directly linked him to the murder.
With nothing concrete on Calvin, detectives end the interview. But before they let him walk free, police run a background check and are shocked by what they find.
He had a criminal history of burglary and theft. There was an outstanding warrant on him for failure to appear on a burglary charge in another jurisdiction. That day that Danielle was killed, if he's in there and she walks in on him, that would be a reason for him to cause her harm because he doesn't want to go back to prison.
He had an outstanding warrant, so he was held for that, and that bought them enough time while they investigated.
Based on the burglaries that had occurred in the complex, we obtained a search warrant for his apartment. We're trying to see if we can find anything that would tie him to Danielle Jennings. We're looking for any type of the stockings or pantyhose or anything that would be similar to the one that we found tied around her neck.
Detectives find no matching stocking, but they do discover incriminating evidence.
We do find evidence of the other burglaries that had been committed in the complex. And then we also found out that he had possession of a master key for the apartment complex so that he could open any door on any building at any time, and he was not supposed to be in possession of that key.
It's only enough evidence to allow investigators to charge Calvin with burglary.
We concluded that search with those items, but nothing was found relevant to the murder. You really don't have anywhere else to go at that point.
We don't have a stocking, we don't have anything that ties him to Danielle or her apartment at all.
That's where we were until Luis called. Out of the blue, he said, do you have the engagement ring?
We told him, no, we don't have a ring. We didn't know one was missing. And then he describes the ring, and then the big bright light goes off. When we were doing the search on Oliver's apartment, we noticed a ring on a dresser in his bedroom, but the ring didn't match any of the items stolen, so we really didn't have a reason to seize it at that time. We do another search warrant, go back into the apartment, we seize that ring, we show it to the fiance. He can't positively identify the ring, but he says her best friend will definitely be able to identify it. If we were able to identify that as being Danielle's ring, that would physically tie Oliver to Danielle and her apartment on the day that she was murdered.
With the entire investigation on the line, detectives race to the home of Danielle's best friend.
Is that ring the engagement ring? This is something we gotta know.
Investigators believe the key to solving the murder of Danielle Jennings is her missing engagement ring.
If we had that ring, then we had the killer.
Detectives have seized a ring from suspect Calvin Oliver's apartment. But is it Danielle's engagement ring? They hope her best friend can answer that question.
The detective and Lewis were there, and I said, well, what's going on? And the detective looked at me and he said, Leslie, he said, do you know what Danielle's engagement ring looked like? And I said, yes, sir, I do. The detective said, is there any defining characteristics to this ring? He goes, and I need you to be specific. And I said, yes, sir. I said it was bent. She had bent the band so it stayed snug on her finger because she wouldn't take the dang thing to get sized.
We needed to find out when was the last time she had seen her wearing the ring.
I said, I saw Danielle the Sunday before she was killed, and she had her ring on Sunday night. And he takes the evidence bag out and he says, is this her ring? And the minute I saw it, I knew it was hers.
When we had that ring and had it identified as being hers, we knew that we had the guy. We knew we had the right person.
Finding the ring was the aha moment in the case. And that was the piece of evidence that allowed us to charge Calvin Oliver with murder.
9 days after her death, Calvin Oliver is arrested for the murder of Danielle Jennings.
The primary charge was malice murder, and that means that you intentionally and unlawfully kill another human being.
Detectives once again interview Calvin, this time taking a different approach.
Once you have a suspect under arrest for the charge that you're interviewing him about, then the interview becomes very direct. He was given a chance again to tell the story where he denied any involvement in the murder, and then he was confronted with the evidence that we had.
We told him about the ring, and that's when he said, well, I stole that ring 2 weeks ago when I did the work order in her apartment. But see, we knew that was a lie because we had people that had seen her wearing the ring, so we knew that he was lying about that.
Calvin refuses to answer any more questions.
We told him that he was being charged with malice murder because you took the pantyhose with you into the apartment because you had intent to harm someone, and he said there was no intent there, which was a good comment to have in a statement. It's like he admitted to killing her without knowing that he had admitted to it. We were convinced 100% that we had our guy. This is the guy that was responsible for the death of Danielle Jennings, and that we were going to send him to prison for the rest of his life.
News of an arrest in Danielle's murder brings relief to her loved ones and surprise.
When they finally discovered who it was, the maintenance man in her apartment building, it was just surreal.
I don't think anybody saw it coming. The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought.
When I saw his picture, I threw up, knowing that that was the man that strangled my best friend for no reason.
At trial, prosecutors present how they believe the crime unfolded.
The day Danielle was killed, Mr. Oliver had already let himself in, hoping for financial gain. After the HR meeting about her coworker, Danielle went home for lunch by herself. Once she opened the door and stepped in, he knew she was there, and he knew she could not exit again. He was not going to get caught.
He ambushed her from behind with the stocking. He came over her head. He pulled it tight, pushed her down onto the bed until she lost consciousness, and then he tied the ligature off, and there was no way for her to escape. There was no heat of the moment. There was no emotion. He killed Danielle because it made his life easier.
The jury hears about the prosecution's most damning evidence, Danielle's stolen engagement ring.
I had to be the one to testify about the ring because I identified the ring. I actually had to look at that man. I had to sit there and look at him. Calvin Oliver sat there just staring daggers into me, is what he did, and tried everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. And I took a big, deep breath, and I stared right back at him.
There was no explanation for the presence of this ring in Calvin Oliver's apartment, other than he took it off Danielle Jennings' dead finger.
On October 13th, 2000, after a 5-day trial, the jury delivers their verdict.
He was found guilty on all charges.
The judge sentences Calvin Oliver to life in prison.
When the verdict came through, we were all holding hands. We just knew justice had been served as far as it could be. I mean, we were glad, but it still wasn't going to bring her back. Her mom was never the same again. It destroyed her. That horrible man took away an angel that was put here. She was a huge light to me, to her fiance, to her son. She was everything to a lot of people. To this day, I still dream of her. There's not a day that goes by that I don't miss her.
A devoted mother with a bright future in show business.
She was very much a rising star.
She was loved by a lot of people.
Is viciously attacked in her own home.
She had put up a fight. She struggled very hard to try to live.
I was beyond shocked that this could happen to such an amazing human. I mean, why?
Police single out several suspects.
The boyfriend began to wash his hands before police arrived on the scene.
A bitter divorce, custody battles, money, these are all motives for murder.
We appreciate you coming and talking to us, man, but we got some problems.
What's the truth? What happened?
Just when detectives think they have the killer in sight.
What did you need to start complaining while your cell phone and her cell phone too? I don't know. All right.
The investigation takes a jaw-dropping turn.
It was a murder from a Hollywood movie.
It was definitely bizarre.
It was just unexpected.
Only a twisted person could pull something like this off.
Nashville, Tennessee is the vibrant heart and soul of country music. In complete contrast, just a few miles away, is the suburban calm of Hermitage.
Hermitage is about 20-30 minutes outside of town, and it was a quiet place.
It doesn't have the hustle and bustle of downtown Nashville. It's an upscale, nice area to live in that didn't really have that much crime.
That all changes one quiet Sunday afternoon.
I was working that afternoon when the call came in.
The victim's boyfriend found her deceased and called 911.
When I'd walked inside the residence, I found the victim dead inside the living room area. There was blood next to her, and it appeared she had several gunshot wounds.
When I looked at the victim's body, I noticed multiple bullet holes, multiple projectile strikes. I also noticed powder burns on one of her hands.
There was gunshot residue on her hands, which would indicate she attempted to grab the gun. The curtains had been pulled down, and some chairs had been moved around, like a struggle had started. It appeared she had put up a fight with the suspect. We began looking for a murder weapon. We could not find one.
We realized that the assailant picked up shell casings and removed them from the scene to make it harder on investigators to determine what happened. We were lucky. We found one shell casing that rolled to the edge of the wall, and it was sort of hidden, so the suspect wasn't able to find that one. It had a green sheen, and I thought it was an old brass shell casing that was corroded. We turned it over for the test.
We knew upon locating that shell casing that we were now going to have a clue that we could follow up on.
We noticed there was money on the counter, and there was other valuables, jewelry, a ring, so it didn't appear that robbery was a motive.
Investigators follow a trail of evidence from outside the house.
The victim's vehicle was parked in the garage. The vehicle's door was open, and it appeared that items from her purse were strewn across the floor of the garage.
It appeared that she was targeted, followed to her residence, and the suspect took the most opportune time to gain entry once the garage was opened, and she pulled in.
Detectives want more information from the victim's boyfriend. He tells police his girlfriend is 39-year-old Veronica Boza. They had plans to go out that day.
He stated when he arrived at the residence, the back garage was up. He noticed the victim's vehicle was parked. The door was open.
Upon entering the residence, he found the victim deceased.
Obviously, he's a suspect for us. He was the one that found the victim, and the red flags are up for us as detectives.
But Brian's too overwhelmed to say much more.
We can't rule him out because we don't know the history and don't know what happened.
We knew we were going to have to conduct an interview with the boyfriend later on.
Veronica was originally from Milan, Italy. Veronica was very religious. She was Catholic. I think her faith is what led her to be so sweet and kind and help others. She was just a beam of light, happy, happy, happy.
Veronica had a lot of energy. And of course, she was from Italy. So she had this accent, and everybody from here was like, wow, where are you from?
At 23, Veronica moved to the U.S. to pursue her dream of working in the entertainment industry as a TV producer.
When I first met Veronica, she was entry level in the production industry. She took to it really well.
Veronica was very much a rising star. You just wanted to work with her.
She would boss you around and you'd like it. She'd tell you what to do and you'd be like, okay,
But work wasn't the center of Veronica's life. Her loved ones were.
Veronica had a lot of friends. She was loved by a lot of people and respected.
In 1994, Veronica got married, and 7 years later, she welcomed a son.
I think Veronica was very happy. She wanted her family, her son, her husband. It was the whole thing. Veronica's son was the end all for her. Like, she would walk through fire for him.
After 15 years of marriage, Veronica and her husband Tim separated, but they were successfully co-parenting their 8-year-old son. Officers confirmed the boy was with his father during the time of the murder. As news of Veronica's death sinks in, her loved ones struggle with the loss.
I was beyond shocked that this could happen to such an amazing human. I mean, why? Why? That's really what I sit with. Why?
To hear this news was like a punch in the gut. I was stunned.
At the crime scene, investigators make a startling discovery. Veronica was a victim of a random mugging and robbery just months before her murder.
We noticed a letter from the state saying the subject that was arrested for robbing her was going to be released on parole.
The person was armed and took property from her, and ultimately the suspect was arrested in the robbery and Veronica prosecuted.
Was the attacker out of jail the day Veronica was murdered?
This was definitely an angle we had to look into and to see his whereabouts and if he had ever made any statements toward Veronica after he had been arrested.
This definitely was a motive that could be related to the homicide.
Coming up, an old friend with a troubling past draws suspicion.
We found out that he had a large number of physical assaults against women.
Then investigators uncover a web of deceit.
This was significant because it showed that he was lying about where he was.
That leads to a killer hiding in plain sight.
We then noticed that his phone was in the general area of the crime scene.
She admitted that she stole her ex-husband's handgun.
It's like, what?
After finding TV producer and loving mother Veronica Boza gunned down in her living room, detectives are trying to establish if a criminal from her past has taken his revenge.
We definitely had to look into seeing if he was out to harm Veronica. We started to do a background investigation on him. He was a dangerous person.
But when investigators dig deeper, they are forced to reassess.
We were able to find records showing that he was in jail during the day of the murder.
With a key suspect eliminated, detectives now focus on reconstructing their victim's final hours.
We found out that Veronica attended St. Edward's Church, and that's where she dropped her son off with his father after church service that Sunday before she was murdered.
Her boyfriend. Brian had spoken with Veronica right after she had left church.
She also spoke to a coworker during her drive.
We were able to learn when her last call was made, and then from Brian's when the 911 call was made.
From this information, detectives pieced together a timeline. Veronica was alive at 12:08 and dead by 12:20.
So there was a 12-minute span that we were able to narrow down of when this murder took place.
Due to the very limited time frame that the homicide could have occurred, the suspect would have been definitely rushed for time to perpetrate the act.
With Brian arriving just moments after Veronica's death, police question how he could have missed spotting her assailant.
So we needed to speak with her boyfriend. We had to interview him and exclude him as a suspect, if possible, or keep him as a suspect.
Brian agrees to go down to the station for further questioning.
You could visibly see he was upset.
Detectives begin by asking about Brian and Veronica's relationship.
Brian was also a TV producer, and they worked on a show together, and then that's how they met.
They had just started dating 2 to 3 months earlier, and they were getting ready to go on a weekend trip.
I've never been loved the way that she loves me. Never felt so strongly about a relationship. We moved very quickly and hadn't fought our hearts on it.
Though Brian appears to be the grieving boyfriend, they still do not have evidence to eliminate him as a suspect.
Did you see her at all today?
No. So
when was the last time you saw her?
Sundays are usually when we reunite.
He stated that he talked to Veronica after she dropped off her son near the church, and they were talking about a short trip they were going to take. He left a friend's house, and he was heading to Veronica's house. Along the way, he stopped and purchased a cold drink at a market, and then spoke with Veronica on the phone, and then he pulled up to the residence.
Walked in, looked to the right, saw her on the ground. I screamed for her name, and then went over to her. I saw the state she was in. I believe she was still alive up until a few moments before I walked in the door.
When police ask how Brian knew Veronica was dead, his answer is troubling.
At first, the boyfriend didn't check the victim to see if she was breathing or if she was now deceased.
When Brian called 911, the 911 operator asked him, "Is she breathing?" Only then did Brian check for a pulse, and he didn't find a pulse.
And then he began to wash his hands before police arrived on the scene.
He didn't perform any type of medical assistance to Veronica. It would seem odd.
Did you hurt Veronica today? Did you had?
No. And she, the love of my life. We plan to spend the rest of our life together.
Brian insists he had nothing to do with Veronica's death. He's then very quick to offer up another suspect.
Had she had any disagreements with anybody that you know of?
Ted Bose.
As we were interviewing Brian, he brought up the soon-to-be ex-husband as a person that we might want to look at as being involved in the homicide.
Brian had stated that Veronica and Tim were going through a rough divorce.
He said the divorce was contentious between Tim and Veronica, and he knew there was issues relating to the custody of their son.
Brian tells the detectives that he and Veronica were worried that Tim was capable of terrible things.
Been very cautious for the past 6 months. I've been keeping an eye out if there was anybody there. I always felt like maybe he was the kind of guy that was going to have somebody there, like surveillance or something like that.
That raised red flags and piqued our interest. A bitter divorce, custody battles, money, these are all motives for murder. We wanted to interview him. Obviously, Tim, he was a suspect to us at this time due to his relationship with Veronica.
Police investigating the homicide of TV producer Veronica Boza are interrogating her boyfriend, Brian Robinson.
I was freaking out. Just like, oh my God.
He points the finger at Veronica's soon-to-be ex-husband, Tim Boza.
We found out that the divorce was within a few weeks to a month of being finalized, and that the divorce was going to be favorable to Veronica.
Brian tells police Tim isn't happy about the settlement or the custody arrangement.
When Veronica refused to submit to him to just being a split, he then attempted to tarnish her as a mother.
With nothing to tie him to the murder, Brian is released. Officers are dispatched to check his alibi, while detectives look into Tim Boza.
We found out that he was a home remodeler and worked for himself, basically.
Investigators learn that Tim and Veronica's marriage became strained in the last year and a half.
We found that Tim had hit a rough patch in his work. Some of his houses weren't selling. He was starting to have money issues.
Her life was taking off and going a really good direction, and Mr. Boza's life was doing the exact opposite.
12 months before the murder, Veronica filed for divorce.
The reason they had started the divorce was the financial situation Tim had put the family in with this business.
His business is basically going down the tubes.
He fought with Veronica over money. There was sort of an issue between Veronica and Tim as far as custody, and Tim was worried Veronica was going to take their son out of the country.
Would Tim kill his wife to keep from losing his son?
We went to Tim's house to notify him of Veronica's death. He didn't seem very upset, didn't seem very shaken.
Tim did start to show emotion when he started talking about how to make notification to his son that his mother had passed. Tim told us his son went to his sister's house. Tim called his sister. He told her what happened to Veronica, and he again became upset at the thought of having to tell his son what happened to his mother.
Police asked Tim to come down to the station for an interview where they question him about his wife's personal life.
Tell me about this boyfriend of hers. You do when you showed you were putting in 14, 16, 20 hours a day. You started hanging out. She just started acting weird. And then I started paying attention more. She fessed up. I said, okay. Tried therapy for a little while. Didn't work. I moved out June 6th.
Tim stated that he was upset that they were going through a divorce and that it wasn't what he wanted.
Had Veronica's relationship with another man driven Tim to kill?
Has your relationship with your wife ever been volatile? No. Was there ever any problems in the divorce? Our thing was good. Do you have any insurance that you're going to claim from this accident happening? I don't know. I have no idea. If I'm the beneficiary, then sure.
The life insurance policy on Veronica was approximately $550,000.
Tim admitted that once they were divorced, Tim would be taken off the life insurance as a beneficiary. So he was 2 to 3 weeks out from being on the life insurance policy.
Detective Crumby cuts to the chase.
Did you have anything to do with your wife's murder? Oh, sure.
When asked if he had done it, Tim reacted calm, cool.
Part of my technique in interviewing people, I like to make accusations and statements to try to throw them off.
I'm sitting there calling you a murderer. I think you are. I don't know how to respond. I didn't do it.
He came back at me and was adamant that he didn't.
Tim says the last time he saw Veronica was in the church parking lot at the custody exchange.
He gave us the exact route that he followed after he picked up his son and the different stops that he made.
Tim had said that he had gone to a hardware store and a grocery store near his residence. He provided receipts.
We had other detectives follow up, actually go to the store, pull surveillance tapes.
When police get a hold of the security footage, they're stunned.
The receipts that Tim had given us match up the times on the surveillance video. And we had already had a time frame of when the homicide happened, so we were able to narrow it down to where he was. Tim was not there at the residence when it happened.
Tim is cleared as a suspect, and officers have also looked into the boyfriend Brian's alibi.
Brian went to a local store for a cold drink before he came to Veronica's house. Surveillance tapes showed him at the store at the time he stated, so we knew where he was during the time we suspect the homicide happened.
Investigators are back at square one.
We don't have a known suspect. I started getting frustrated.
Anytime you have a homicide of this magnitude, community members, neighbors, friends are obviously worried.
Everybody was just really shocked and tried to comfort each other and try to understand what happened.
Why the hell did this happen? How did this happen? Who did it? I wanted justice for her. No matter who did it, no matter what it was, I wanted answers.
Officers canvass Veronica's neighbors, asking if they saw or heard anything unusual around the time of the murder.
A neighbor stated they saw a light-colored white or silver SUV or van in the alley right before the homicide. They didn't know if it was involved or not. They stated that it was gone before the police arrived.
Did the driver have something to do with Veronica's murder? Is this the lead police have been hoping for?
We started to have some pieces to the puzzle, but at this point, we didn't have the puzzle, and we didn't even have the border.
Two days after Veronica Boza's murder, police still don't have a solid suspect. Their only lead is a light-colored SUV that was seen in the alley by Veronica's house right before she was attacked.
We tried to narrow down whose vehicle that possibly could have been. We were told that maybe a handyman that comes around, so we followed up and determined that he had a cart truck.
With few leads, investigators looked to Veronica's autopsy results for insight.
The medical examiner said that she was shot 4 times. She had a defensive wound to her arm. The last time was a shot to her head to make sure that she was dead, so she was basically executed.
Well, is this a stalker? Is this a hitman? What is it? And so everybody was on alert.
While the murder weapon wasn't found at the scene, police do get one piece of good news.
Technicians ran ballistic tests on the shell casings, and that gave us a type of gun we were looking for. It was fired from a Hi-Point 9mm.
Investigators decide to track Veronica's phone for further clues.
When we have a homicide, we like to collect electronic evidence. We knew from family and friends that she had an iPhone, so we had our tech investigator follow up on cell phone records and GPS records.
We were able to see that she'd gone to church and then came back home, and then now that phone is missing.
Police believe Veronica's attacker took her phone.
The location of the cell phone was being recorded, leaving the scene of the homicide, traveling down the roads, down the interstate.
Was the signal leading police straight to Veronica's killer?
That was one key piece that really opened our eyes. It was almost as if Veronica was helping us in our investigation.
But then the signal goes dead.
So we thought that the phone had been destroyed, powered off, or just the battery died. We requested records for her current boyfriend, Brian. We determined that he was telling us the truth about where he had been, what he had been doing.
We looked at the cell phone records and the GPS locations for Tim in relation to the homicide. His cell phone was hitting on towers along the path that he stated he took.
But something else about Tim's phone records jumps out to detectives.
We noticed multiple calls to one number before and after the custody exchange.
Police learn the number belongs to Corey Cotham.
Corey Cotham was a friend of Tim's. They worked together, they hung out together, and they were very close. He was friends with Veronica, and at some point actually stayed with Tim and Veronica.
Were the calls just routine conversations between two friends, or something more sinister?
Tim had told us that he spoke with his friend Corey, but he just made it seem like it was just a matter of the fact, not a long conversation. But this was definitely a red flag to us.
But when police look closer at Corey, they find Tim and Veronica's good friend has a dark and troubling past.
We found out that he had a large number of assaults, physical assaults against women.
Corey Cotham preyed on women. He was always playing women and trying to get money. He had such a high opinion of himself. He called himself a big man.
It's a major revelation. Was it possible Corey had something to do with Veronica's death?
Maybe there was a personal reason between him and Veronica that we didn't know about that could have been related to the homicide. We were just unsure at this point.
We then got a warrant issued for Corey's cell phone data to show what Corey had been up to that day.
The results raise immediate suspicions.
Corey's phone and Veronica's phone were both hitting in the same general area as each other. We noticed that the day of the homicide, he was in the general area of St. Edward Catholic Church, which is where Veronica went to Mass at that morning. We then noticed that his phone was in the general area of the crime scene later that morning.
When detectives track his phone's movement after the killing, they make a stunning discovery.
We noticed that Corey Cotham's device was in the area of the crime scene, then heads back out towards Interstate 40.
The route is suspiciously similar to the path Veronica's cell phone took.
We would conclude that the two devices are in close proximity to each other and that there's a good probability that the phone was taken by the suspect at that point.
Upon learning that information, we now started looking at Corey Cotham as a suspect in the murder of Veronica Boza.
Investigators come up with a plan to lure Corey into talking.
I was very nonchalant with him. Tried to play it as we needed his help to clear his buddy, Tim.
Corey agrees to meet with detectives.
He didn't think our radar was up in regards to him.
Corey confirms he spoke with Tim the morning of the murder.
It was a couple times. I know I called, but I know I called on the way back into Nashville.
He stated he was coming back from Kentucky from seeing one of his girls, and that at the time he spoke with Tim, he was passing the Portland area on the interstate.
Where were you when you talked to him at 12:20? I was already back in town. I went over one of my girls' house and just chilled with her, you know.
He went to a girlfriend's house in Nashville, which was on the other side of town from where the homicide occurred. So he put himself way away from the homicide location.
This was significant because it showed that he was lying about where he was.
Then, investigators decide to set a trap.
One thing we had to do was put Corey's phone on his person and in his hand 100% of the time.
Is that the best way to get a hold of you, by your phone? Yeah. You always have it on you? Always. Okay, you're like me, man, 24/7. Hey, I got the car charger, the whole deal.
We were able to get Corey to admit that he always had his cell phone with him and that nobody else had the phone that day.
And that's almost as good as putting a weapon in Corey's hand.
All right, man. We appreciate you coming and talking to us, man, but we got some problems. What's wrong? We've already pulled cell phone records, all right? And what you told us is totally not what your cell phone records show.
He got fired up. He was pretty upset, pretty mad.
After Veronica Boza is found shot to death, police have caught her old friend Corey Coughlin in a lie.
What did you need to start complaining while your cell phone and her cell phone too? I don't know. All right? I'm telling you, man, I ain't got nothing to do with this. I ain't have anything to do with that. I knew Veronica before I knew Tim. I ain't got nothing to do with that. That's what's crazy. Dude, I came because I'm trying to bail my boy out from getting some mess.
He started to get angry, started getting frustrated.
You want a lawyer before you talk to us, or you want to talk to us? There's nothing I can tell y'all. I haven't done anything.
At that point, we needed his vehicle and his cell phone in relation to the investigation, and we went and obtained a search warrant for them.
When police seize Corey's vehicle, they notice striking details.
Corey had a champagne-colored Cadillac Escalade. A neighbor saw a light-colored vehicle in the alley that day of the homicide. We found a collapsible lunchbox. We found gloves and clothing, shoes, and other items that we didn't really know how they related to the scene.
If Corey is Veronica's killer, what's his motive?
Corey is definitely a dangerous person. You don't know what he's capable of.
He was a sociopath.
But with no hard evidence against him, police have to let Corey go.
Releasing him at that point was frustrating. Obviously, Corey was a top suspect at the time, but we needed to do further investigation. And
one of the things that we did with Corey's records is we looked at everybody he talked to the day of the homicide.
One of the numbers that stuck out was around 12:28 in the afternoon. So I called the number, and the person on the other end of the phone stated he used to live across from Corey.
He had stated that he had cleaned a gun for Corey a couple weeks prior.
It was a Hi-Point 9mm. Corey came to him and pulled it out of a red collapsible lunch pail. And we found a red collapsible lunch pail in the trunk of Corey's Escalade. So it started to come together at that point.
Investigators need to find the gun and connect it to Corey, but they still have a long way to go. With phone records placing him near Veronica's house at the time of her murder, police confront Corey's only alibi, his girlfriend, Jenny.
During that interview, Jenny had told us that Corey had been with her that day from 12 to 12:30 because she fixes him lunch at that time.
It's the same time Veronica was murdered. I showed her Corey's phone records and told her we knew she was lying.
Detective Crummy and myself fully explained to Jenny that lying during a murder investigation, she could go to jail.
At that point, she backed off. She actually walked away from us and she called her attorney. I didn't know her motive for lying. I didn't know if she was scared of Corey. I didn't know if she was involved in the homicide and complicit. So we had a lot of other investigation to do and a lot more digging.
Detectives still need a witness to place Corey at the scene of the murder.
We showed multiple neighbors an array of photographs of different vehicles, and one was an Escalade. They couldn't make a positive identification on what type of vehicle it was, so ultimately we couldn't use it.
It's another roadblock for police. and more frustration for Veronica's family and friends.
It makes you mad that somebody would do something like that to somebody like her.
It felt twisted. It was like we couldn't get answers. We were getting all these rumors. What's the truth? What is the truth? What happened?
Investigators need a break, and they finally get one.
Jenny, Corey's girlfriend, was starting to contact the police department multiple times and wanting to speak with detectives in relation to the case.
So when we interviewed Jenny the second time, she decided to tell us what really happened.
Not sure what time he was at my house. He was at my house that day. I can't be certain of the time.
Now she couldn't provide an alibi for Corey. She did state she saw him that morning, but she was half asleep. When she woke up later in the afternoon, Corey was now at her house after the time of when the murder happened.
You didn't go with him? You didn't take him?
No. I did not leave my house.
Jenny does make one startling admission that's very valuable to police.
She admitted that she stole her ex-husband's handgun and put it inside a red collapsible lunchbox and hid it in her vehicle.
Whenever I thought I could get arrested for it, so I was going to try to sneak it back. Whenever I went to go sneak the gun back, it was missing. And the only person that knew was Corey.
It's a major discovery. Not only is Corey's alibi shattered, police now have a lead on the possible murder weapon.
We showed Jenny a picture of the red collapsible lunchbox we found in Corey's vehicle, and she identified that as being the one that she put her handgun in after she stole it from her ex-husband. She agreed at that point to work with us to prove that she wasn't involved in the homicide.
When detectives get the results from the analysis on Corey's phone, they sense they're on the right track.
They were able to recover a picture of a high-point 9mm handgun.
It's the same type of gun that was used to kill Veronica.
The one shell casing we were able to locate on the scene had a greenish tint to it. After looking at Corey's phone, the ammunition in the picture also had a greenish tint to it.
This was possibly the gun that was used in the homicide. We didn't know if Jenny gave it to Corey. Corey stole it, we didn't know. So we dug through the police reports relating to her and her ex-husband, and it just says that a handgun was stolen.
When police contact Jenny's ex, he confirms that the gun in the photo is his.
He stated it was the high-point 9mm that was stolen.
Was this the actual gun used in Veronica's murder?
Our main motive was to find ballistics that affirmatively tie the handgun that was stolen as the handgun used in the homicide to kill Veronica.
Jenny's ex also tells police he used to shoot his gun on his property.
We searched everywhere trying to find evidence, any shell casings that could have matched. As we were about to wrap up our search, our ID tech actually found one shell casing and he dug a couple more. I knew it could be a very critical turning point in the investigation if it didn't match.
3 hours later, detectives received the ballistics report.
It's a match. Definitely was fired from the same handgun. It was the best thing we could have done and could have to tie the handgun to the scene without actually having the handgun.
But where is the gun that was used to kill Veronica? Before investigators can lay any charges against Corey, they get an urgent call from Jenny.
She told the police Corey had planned a trip to Barbados. He was going to leave the country.
Police now believe Corey Cotham murdered Veronica Boza, but Corey's girlfriend Jenny has told detectives he's about to flee the country. They need to act fast before he slips through their fingers.
We contacted Jenny again and asked her to come in and do a controlled phone call.
I asked Jenny to wear a wire to see if Corey would talk about what had happened, and also to try to get him to come back to Tennessee where we could arrest him.
Jenny is nervous, but agrees to help police.
Hey, what's wrong? Hey, they're coming to arrest me, Corey. What do I do?
She stated that the police were coming after her, that we had a warrant for her.
They got some sort of bullet, and it matches the same thing, exact match as one that they found at the crime scene.
She stated that the detectives were able to tie the handgun that she had from her ex-husband to him, or to the homicide. She said Corey They know.
They're saying for 9mm, they can get 9mm bullets anywhere. That don't matter. So that's stupid.
That was an aha moment because we never released to him or anybody else the caliber of weapon that was used.
So we were very confident in all the evidence from Cotham, which was just overwhelming that he was the killer.
But it's what Corey says next that blows investigators away.
Get in touch with Tim. Let him know what's going on.
Mr. Cotham did make a statement, you need to check with Tim and get with Tim.
For him to tell Jenny to call Tim, that let us know right then and there that Tim was involved in the homicide.
It's a surprising twist. Had Tim been involved in Veronica's death after all?
Surveillance was started on Tim that afternoon.
Mr. Boza had a big motive. He had custody issues in his marriage. He had money problems.
Tim had financial gains from the death of Veronica Boza.
$550,000 in insurance, which would have turned his life around.
While Tim had motive to kill Veronica, he didn't pull the trigger. But would he have recruited the couple's mutual friend to do his dirty work? Police take Corey into custody. Then they close in on Tim.
Officers were able to follow Tim around, and then once the warrants were obtained, Tim was arrested during a traffic stop.
Corey refuses to speak to police, but Tim is eager to talk. He tells detectives a tale so twisted, they can hardly believe it.
I'm sorry, I lied to everybody here. There was a movie years ago. They both had terrible wives, mothers, or whatever, and they said, what does this crisscross thing? And just in jest, I said, okay, hey, we should do the same thing.
It was a very crazy plan.
This homicide didn't make sense to me and how it played out. It was just unexpected.
It was definitely bizarre when he told us what the plan was.
Corey was supposed to murder Veronica, and Tim was supposed to murder one of Corey's girlfriend's ex-husband. The two of them got this idea from a Hollywood movie with the same type of plot.
The crisscross killing theory was strange. Of course, Boza claimed he thought they were joking, but I could see that Mr. Cotham really talking it up and acting like Mr. Big Man or Mr. Hitman that they could pull this off.
The day she's murdered, he calls you and says it's done.
Yes, sir, he did.
What did he say, Rick?
He just said that he went in the house and she tried to run and that he shot her.
When I talked to him, it said that Corey said it's done, which was obviously dynamite evidence for us.
Police learned Corey also had something more to gain from Veronica's death.
Tim promised to pay Corey $35,000 of the life insurance policy.
His wife was leaving him, and he just had anger and jealousy issues of the victim. He was a desperate man, and he had the strongest motive of anybody.
Corey Cotham and Tim Boza are tried separately for their roles in Veronica's murder. In court, prosecutors put forward a theory of how the crime unfolded.
The morning of the homicide, Corey went down to St. Edward Catholic Church.
The only person that could have told Corey Cotham where she was going to be that day was Mr. Boza.
While Tim runs errands to build his alibi, Corey follows Veronica home.
Veronica opens her garage door. She pulls in to park. Corey pulled right in behind her, got out of his vehicle. He was wearing a mask and gloves, and Veronica was in her vehicle and saw this. She runs into the house. Corey's chasing after her. I believe they fight in the kitchen area and in the living room area.
She fought for her life. She obviously struggled very hard to try to live.
Corey and Tim are both found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder.
Mr. Cotham got life without parole. Mr. Boza got a life sentence, which means he'll have to serve 51 years before he's eligible for parole.
Veronica was definitely an unexpected target. I can't fathom Tim would ever do something like this. He hired the hitman. He's just evil. Only a twisted person could pull something like this off. He has no soul.
The truth behind what happened, it just makes you feel sick to your stomach.
Veronica, we lost one of the most amazing human beings that ever walked this earth. Miss her all the time. It's painful.
The real tragedy in this case is all the families that were destroyed. Veronica's son won't have a mother and father.
I remember as someone who you enjoyed working with and looked forward to being around.
I think Veronica would want to be remembered as a loving soul. That simple. She's just such a bright light. And she would want that for everybody.
A cherished family at the center of a small town.
They laughed and they joked around and they were happy together. They were loved and well respected in our community.
Is gunned down in cold blood.
I'll never forget walking in the house that morning and seeing what I saw. Who could have done this? Was it somebody that they knew? Maybe this person had sought some type of revenge.
Detectives pursue a trail of suspects.
He was actually set to gain from the death.
And then his behavior was alarming.
During the polygraph, he started carrying the stuff off. I know they had issues within their relationship.
They said, well, I can take care of that problem for the right sum of money.
But the killer remains elusive.
What are we missing? What are we not doing?
Until a shocking confession reveals the true culprit.
And she agreed to wear a recording device and elicit some more information. I mean, it was just incredible. It was disturbing.
The killer was about the most unexpected thing. It was such a shock.
Columbia, Kentucky is a small but tight-knit rural community.
Everyone knows everyone else. Your neighbors feel like family. People watch out for one another.
Not uncommon. You'll be walking downtown, you'll stop, run into friends or family. Very friendly atmosphere.
One of the most beloved families in Columbia are the Wellnitzes. They own a veterinary clinic just steps away from their home.
I just remember that environment at the clinic was a place that I, as a kid, wanted to spend every spare moment that I had, just because it was a great place to be. Joe and Beth, their kids, Dennis and Meg, they were kind, they were loving, and they were fun to be around.
On February 26, 1993, the town forever changes after two of Joe and Beth's employees make a grim discovery just after 8 a.m. at the Wellnitz home.
2 employees had shown up for work, but Joe and Beth were not at the clinic. The clinic was adjacent to the residence. So the gentleman walked over to the house, went in the back door, and discovered Joe's body in the downstairs area of the home. The lady that had also shown up for work that morning, she then went to the house, discovered 2 bodies upstairs.
Joe and Beth and their son, Dennis, they've been shot. Then she ran out and called the police.
Investigators rushed to the scene.
I'll never forget walking in the house that morning and seeing what I saw. It was just total shock. I knew what kind of people they were. I knew how kind they were and how compassionate they were with their work that they did. I couldn't believe it. When we entered the house, there was Joe laying on the floor. He was on his stomach. His hand was underneath his chest.
He had a pair of gray sweatpants on and a white T-shirt. It looked like he came out of a bathroom and had been shot and fell face first. Blood that had pooled around the body.
My initial reaction was shock. But then I realized shortly thereafter that I had a job to do, and my job was to take care of the scene to see if we could find out who did this horrible thing. Around the scene where Joe was found, there was multiple shell casings, and you could see bullet holes in the walls. We went from there to the
upstairs and we found Dennis's body laying there in his bedroom. He had no shirt on. You could see bullet holes in his back. There was also shell casings laying around. Looked like he was crawling on the floor and was executed by the killer at that point. Entering into the back bedroom that belonged to Joe and Beth, you could see multiple shell casings back there.
Beth was found on the side of the bed nearest to the doorway. She appeared to have been standing when she was shot, with multiple gunshot wounds to her head and upper torso. The Wellnitses were all found either in or near a bed or in clothes that suggested they had been sleeping. So it was apparent that it had happened during the night at some point or early morning hours.
After examining the bodies, police scour the rest of the house for clues, but there's no sign of a murder weapon.
There were no broken windows, there was no furniture turned over, the house had not been ransacked. It was significant that there was no forced entry, that at least gave the impression that it was somebody with some degree of familiarity with the home and with the Wellnitz family. It appeared this family had been targeted.
Who could have done this? You know, who is the person that would have done such a horrible crime in this community that is usually so gentle? Was it somebody that they knew? Maybe this person had sought some type of revenge. Once we saw that these three people had been murdered, we immediately wanted to know, where is Meg Wellnitz at, so we can find her to make sure she's safe, first of all, make sure she's not a victim. We were able to locate her. She was at school in Lexington and was unharmed.
Officers are tasked with breaking the news to Joe and Beth's daughter.
Meg was told that her mom and dad and brother were murdered, were dead. I really felt sorry for her. I thought, now how is she going to go on? You know, how does she recover from this?
We got a phone call just a little while after I got up, and they said Beth and Joe have been killed. And at that moment, we didn't know Dennis also had been killed. And I just stayed in my room that day and just cried. Just couldn't believe that they were gone. They were like a second set of parents for me.
One of my family members had called. They gave me the horrible news that Joe and Beth and Dennis had all been murdered. And that's a day you don't forget.
Joe Wellnitz was born in 1942 and grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. From a young age, he always loved animals and turned that passion into a career.
Not many rural communities anywhere would have been able to boast of having a veterinarian with the background that Joe had. Joe was one of the most caring, kindest gentlemen that you will ever meet.
In his 30s, Joe met Beth Preston, a woman 10 years his junior. Both divorced, they married in 1979, and Joe adopted her 2 kids, Dennis and Meg. 2 years later, they moved their family and Joe's clinic from Lexington to Columbia.
Meg would come in and out of the clinic. Dennis would I would just see him outside. He was only 20 years old.
Dennis was popular in school. He had worked in town. He had attended college. He was just a well-liked young man.
Beth was the one I was closest to. She was the face of the clinic. She was the person everyone saw when they walked in the door. Always had a smile on her face. The relationship between Joe and Beth was perfect to me. They laughed and they joked around and they were happy together. They were a very happy family.
But one horrific night has changed everything. Who could have wanted to kill the Wellnitzes, and why?
The 2 employees that discovered the bodies were certainly interviewed that morning. There was really no motive, and the way the 2 of them arrived that morning, there was really no opportunity for either of them to commit the murders. They were dismissed as suspects.
In Lexington, police ask Meg to help them piece together her family's last movements. She says she visited them for dinner 2 days ago, but had returned that night as she had school.
Meg told the police that she'd been in Lexington the night before the bodies were found, and that she'd been playing cards with some friends, her boyfriend, as well as another couple, Bill Meese, and then Bill Meese's wife.
When asked if Meg was aware of any problems at home, she gives police their first lead.
There was a couple that were tenants of Joe and Bess they may have had issues with, and their names Brenda and Dave Cowell.
The Cowells had been living in a cabin on the Wellnitz property.
They were living there rent-free, exchanged for doing some work for Joe and Beth. There was some discrepancy there about whether they were doing the work sufficiently or not. Joe and Beth felt like they weren't, so they gave them a bill for $1,800 for the rent. And ultimately, they never paid it. They filed bankruptcy.
Were the Cowells angry enough to want the Wellnitzes dead? Was this murder paid?
Discrepancy about the work they were doing, whether it was sufficient or not, especially when it came to the money. And then this bill for $1,800, we thought, well, this could be a motive for them wanting to do something. We knew that we had to talk to them. We had to see if they were involved.
Police learned the Cowells no longer live on the Wellnitz property.
Maybe they left there disgruntled. We went on that theory. Maybe they had went to the Wellnitz house that morning and then got into it with them, and then that's when all this escalated from there.
While detectives tracked down the Cowells, officers canvassed the area for witnesses.
We did a neighborhood canvass to talk to people to see if anybody in that area had heard anything, seen anything, or had any other information that they could provide. We were not able to identify anybody that did hear anything that went on that night during the shooting or anything.
4 days after the murder, detectives locate the Cowells and bring them in for separate interviews. Brenda claims she didn't hold any grudge against the Wellnitzes.
She told us that even though they had not paid the money that Joe and Beth felt like they owed, they had worked out the discrepancy and everything had moved on from that.
Police asked Brenda where she was the night of the murder.
They ended up moving off the farm. She said she was not there. She was at home when it happened.
When detectives speak with Brenda's husband, Dave, he's unable to confirm her alibi because of his own.
Dave was working in Louisville, Kentucky, which is almost in Indiana, probably 100 miles from where this happened at. He adamantly denied any involvement in this. He didn't want it to do harm to them.
Investigators speak to friends of the Wellnitzes to confirm the dispute with the Cowells had been resolved.
We were talking to friends in that area. We were able to determine that that situation where those hard feelings were had been resolved a long time prior to this happening. They were ruled out as far as having anything to do with this murder.
With no arrests made, fear begins to grip the town.
We thought if this could happen to the Wellnitzes, it could happen to any of us. It could happen to anyone. They were loved and well respected in our community, and so if they could be killed, who would be next? People were scared. Everybody wanted to know who did it, why they did it, and how they did it.
Word travels fast. Everybody was expressing their opinion as to what may or may not have contributed to this. But everybody was just guessing, gossiping.
It's got the whole community in an uproar about what happened. We had to get some answers pretty quickly, make sure that it wasn't some random killing and that other people may be coming next. When we started thinking about who could have done this, we started thinking about the veterinary business. People get very sensitive about their pets, so we thought, well, maybe somebody had gotten disgruntled over that. We learned from the employees there that there was an issue between Jerry Yarberry and the Wellnitzes where he had brought in his dog to have treatment done to its eye, and the dog ultimately was blind. So we thought, well, maybe this might be a motive for somebody to do harm to them. Some of the key questions that we wanted to know from Jerry was, how did he feel now toward the Wellnitzes, and how did he feel toward what had happened between them?
Police bring Jerry into the station for questioning.
He told us that he was very upset about his pet. He refused to pay the bill that was owed to the Wellnesses. They ended up having to file a lawsuit against him in order to recoup the funds.
While Jerry admits he was angry with Joe, he says he isn't a killer.
He adamantly denied doing anything to the Wellnesses as far as going to that extreme. When we talked to Jerry, we learned that he was home watching TV with his wife and kids, and we were able to confirm that that's where he was at, and therefore we were able to eliminate him as a suspect in this case.
There's frustration on the part of the police because they want to see a crime solved. They want to see a murderer, in this case, held accountable. They want to see that person punished. And then there's frustration because we don't know if justice is ever going to be served.
As the case threatens to stall, a friend of the Wellnitz family contacts police with pertinent information.
I said, I'm a real estate broker, and our getting the property ready to sell, there was an indenture, kind of a rectangle, in the floor of that master bedroom closet. I knew for a fact Joe and them kept a floor safe upstairs in their bedroom in the closet. I'm assuming, but that's where he kept all these important papers, his deed, anything that was of significance.
Gives you the opinion that the safe was part of the plan all along, that the killer knew where that safe was at. It was not setting out in the open where you would commit these 3 murders and then say, okay, there's a safe, I'm going to take that with me. It was hidden back in a closet.
It certainly caused the officers to focus their attention on who would want that safe, who would know the safe was there, and who would stand to have some benefit from removing the safe, especially in light of the fact that nothing else was taken, nothing else was disturbed.
If we could locate that safe, and very easily, that's going to put us on the trail of whoever committed this crime.
Police investigating the first triple homicide in Columbia, Kentucky, are searching for an object stolen from the scene they hope will lead them to the killer.
The missing fire safe was certainly a critical piece of evidence that the officers were investigating. They tried to determine more specifically what the contents of the safe were, what was in there, what was going to perhaps turn up that might then be a clue.
In talking to the family, we were able to learn that there was possibly could be insurance papers in that safe, maybe even up to around $1,000.
In this case, the only motive was to either cause the death of the Wellnitz family or to take the safe out.
As detectives put out an APB for the safe, the autopsy results come in.
One of the crucial things that we need to know is the time of death.
As far as the time frame of the death, the internal examination of the bodies was consistent that they had been killed within a few hours prior to the bodies being discovered.
It's estimated Joe, Beth, and Dennis were murdered around 4 a.m.
The medical examiner was able to determine that each victim died as a result of multiple gunshot wounds.
None of the victims had defense marks on their bodies, meaning they had likely been taken by surprise.
Additional projectiles were recovered from the bodies during the autopsy. The firearms examiner did determine that all of the shots were fired from a 9mm handgun. It did seem likely that they were all fired by the same person, given the fact that they were all fired from the same gun.
Obviously, from there, we're going to start doing multiple interviews to try to eliminate or show who has killed these 3 people, who could have that much of a grudge against them. During our investigation, we were able to learn that Joe had another son by the name of Eric. From my previous personal experience with Joe and Beth, I didn't know about Eric until after the murder. Joe had adopted him, much the way that he did with Meg and Dennis, and then that marriage broke apart. It was a surprise to me to learn that there was another child involved that Joe had adopted at a young age. We started receiving information, documentation showing that Eric was actually still set to gain from the death of Joe. There was actually a will giving him so much money out of the estate to the tune of $250,000. Eric was somebody that we needed to talk to because that much money obviously would be a motive for somebody to do something like this.
Police tracked the 19-year-old down at his home in Lexington.
When Eric was interviewed, he was shocked that it occurred. They had had issues within their relationship, him and Joe. It was a very distant relationship and then non-existent after a while. Eric also indicated that he felt like he was replaced by Dennis. They had completely become estranged after so long and had stopped any contact with each other. One of the things that we learned was that Eric did resent Joe. Part of that resentment was because of this estrangement.
Had Eric settled a score and inherited a fortune by killing the family? When police question him about the will, they are taken aback by his response.
When he learned that he was a beneficiary to this will, he was actually surprised that he was included in it, because they've been estranged for that many years.
But detectives can't just take Eric at his word.
The motive is there, the possibility, so we needed to know whether he had any type of alibi that we could substantiate to make sure that he wasn't in Columbia that morning. We learned during our interview with Eric Wellness that he had worked that night, and then once he got off work, he went to a friend's house and slept at that friend's house.
Eric says he was in Lexington the entire night, 2 hours away from Columbia.
So we were able to talk to that friend and determine that he did not have the opportunity to commit this crime. We felt pretty certain that he was not a suspect at this point. We eliminated him and moved on.
I was shocked, and it was an odd situation being questioned by the police officers. The fact that I was named in the will, if that was something that I had known, then that for sure gives me a motive. But there's no way in the world I could have ever done anything like that. Yes, I was angry as a child, having your dad disappearing out of your life, kind of in a snap of a finger. It was hard, and I was angry, but not that kind of anger where I wished anything bad.
Detectives learn that Meg, the only other surviving member of the family, is also named in the will. Could she have anything to do with the murder?
I really felt bad for Meg at that time because I knew Meg, but we had to get some answers. When we approached her about the will, she didn't know about it. She also wanted answers, She loved them. Joe and Beth and Dennis.
She was so bright and intelligent and loving.
Police ask Meg about her relationship with her parents. She says it was good, but she raises one concern.
Officers did learn that Beth and Meg had some disagreements over some of the people that she was now spending a lot of time with.
One person in particular, Meg's boyfriend, Randy Appleton.
Beth and Joe didn't want him around, so we needed to talk to Randy. Randy became a viable person of interest.
After 3 members of the Wellnitz family are gunned down in their own home, police now have a new suspect, the boyfriend of surviving daughter Meg, 20-year-old Randy Appleton.
Joe didn't go into any details, but he had a concern, I think, of the direction that Meg had taken as far as who she was associating with.
That could be a motive for Randy Appleton.
Detectives asked Randy where he was the night of the murder.
He was leery about talking to us.
Randy tells police he was playing cards with Meg and her friends until 2 a.m. the night of the murder. Then he mentions something that grabs detectives' attention.
We learned that he was interested in firearms. We had learned that he had frequented a firing range.
If the murder weapon had been used at the same firing range where he in fact acknowledged having been practicing with a 9mm would be a very critical part of the investigation if those shell casings collected from the range matched the murder weapon that was believed to have been used to kill the Wellens family.
We're starting to see red flags at this point. Randy was one that liked guns. He did like to go to that firing range and did use a weapon there. We actually ended up going to the firing range and collecting several spent shell casings. All of them were submitted to the crime lab. Our hope was that we could match those rounds through the laboratory to some of the 9mm shell casings that we had located.
2 weeks later, police received the results on the shell casings.
They were not able to find any casings that matched as having been fired from the murder weapon that was used to kill the Wellens family.
It was very disappointing that we were unable to tie any of those shell casings to Randy Appleton.
It suggested either that they used a different weapon at the firing range than was used to murder the family, or that it could have been somebody else.
Despite the setback, Randy's love of guns and familiarity with the Wellnitz home means he is still a suspect. Police look to confirm his alibi with those he and Meg claim to have been with the night of the murder, Bill and Regina Meese.
We had to talk to them to see if that was what they were doing, playing cards during the early morning hours, because that was Randy's alibi. Bill was cooperative, where Bill had agreed to talk to us about certain things.
Bill corroborates Randy's alibi.
They were all four together playing cards till the early morning hours. He agreed to take a lie detector test. During the process of the polygraph examiner asked him if he knew anything about what happened, if he had any involvement about what happened.
And then his behavior was something that was alarming. It was something that caused some concern with the officers.
He started tearing the stuff off that you put on during a polygraph and just shut it down right then. And then the polygraph was over at that point. So he did not complete the polygraph. He was just very mad. Definitely raised red flags with us that he knows more than he's telling us, and that he's afraid of that polygraph because that polygraph might tell us more than he wants us to know.
Despite his behavior, police have nothing concrete on Bill and are forced to let him go.
We tried to talk to Regina, but Bill did not want us to interview her. He was very controlling with her. It's over at this point. We were still running down leads. Obviously, you always get leads that you're going to follow. But one of the things that I thought early on was, if we ever get to a point where Regina and Bill are not talking, we need to go back and reapproach her.
Lacking any new developments, months turn into years, leaving detectives and the Wellnitz's loved ones frustrated.
What are we missing? What are we not doing? They're friends of mine, and this was one of those cases that you want to solve before your career is over. It was just like you were at a dead end, and we couldn't figure that out,
When the case went cold, it was very disheartening just knowing that someone had committed this terrible crime and that they may possibly never have to pay for that. I just remember feeling so sad. Beth and Joe were just such a light in our community.
You don't have any answers when it happened. I had no idea of who could have done it or why they would have done it. There was so little information coming out, it just kind of fell to the wayside. It's just sad.
The case remains cold for nearly a decade. But in 2002, detectives decide to take a fresh look at the triple homicide.
This case is still on my mind. I had never forgot it. And I said, okay, what's the condition or what's the status of Bill and Regina? And I learned at that point that they were separated. That was the thing that we were waiting on before, is when this separation occurred, to go see what Regina had to say outside of the control of Bill Meese.
Police track Regina down, and what she has to tell them is shocking.
When we met with Regina in Lexington, she told us that she had proof of who killed the Wellnesses.
Nine years after the murder of Joe and Beth Wellnitz and their son Dennis, police finally have a break in the case. One of their surviving daughter Meg's best friends, Regina Meese, says she knows who the killer is and has proof.
When we approached her, she immediately said, "I've got this piece of evidence." She essentially wanted some assurance that she wouldn't be charged with tampering with evidence. And I assured her that if she in fact turned it over to law enforcement, I didn't think it would even constitute a crime. Now, at that time, we didn't know if she had photographs that perhaps were taken during the commission of the crime. We didn't know if she may have had the firearm that was used in the commission of the crime, or what piece of evidence that she had. But she shared with us that she had in fact retained possession of the fire safe that had been removed from the back closet in the bedroom upstairs of Beth and Joe's home.
When police asked Regina how she got the safe, she says the person who gave it to her is the one who shot the Wellnitzes.
Regina's the one started the ball rolling. Everything started to fall in place. Regina told us that Bill Meese was the one responsible for the death of Dennis and the death of Joe and Beth Wellnitz. It was very shocking, very shocking.
She had been interviewed by the police before, but had been told by her then husband, now ex-husband, not to talk to the police, not to tell them anything. And it certainly appeared, at least, to be a burden lifted that she was able to share this information.
It was a huge deal when we heard what she had to say. That was the part that we needed to happen, and that from there on, it steamrolled from there.
Regina takes police to her home to see the fire safe.
It was the same type and everything that we were missing from the house that night. It was the same measurements, that same dimensions that we had measured when we were in the Wellness house and discovered that the safe was missing.
When we later compared the bottom impressions on that fire safe to the imprints taken from the closet, it was a perfect match, and in fact it was the fire safe that was stolen from the Wellness home.
Nothing of significant value is found in the safe, but Regina delivers another explosive revelation to police. She tells them that Bill is planning to kill again.
Interviewing Bill Meese's ex-wife, it came to the attention of the police that a mutual friend had had an encounter with Bill Meese where he had offered to kill her boyfriend.
Bill had told her that he would commit this murder for her for $500.
I mean, it was just incredible. It was disturbing.
Was Bill some kind of twisted serial murderer? Police decide to move before he can strike once more.
We initiated this investigation and contacted that lady that Bill had approached.
She agreed to wear a recording device, speak with Bill Meese. He was provided a certain sum of money as a down payment, and the police then arrested him for offering to kill this mutual friend's boyfriend.
With Bill in jail, police question him about the Wellnitz triple homicide.
There was no statements made about the Wellnitz murder that he was willing to make at that time.
When we interviewed him there, I mean, we did not get a confession from him. He denied it at that point. Even though we knew that we were on the right track, it still takes evidence to put this together.
As detectives work on building their case with Bill still in custody, news spreads quickly about his arrest and possible involvement in the shooting of Joe, Beth, and Dennis.
When I first heard about Bill being a suspect, it sent shivers up my spine because I immediately am flooded with the memories of being in junior high with Bill and having very, very strange interactions with him. I was 13, 14 years old. He at one point stabbed me in the leg with a pencil. He had been open about talking about murder and proceeded to threaten me that if I said anything about it that he'd kill me and my family. I hadn't seen my dad in years, when I went to school with Bill. I don't know how they knew each other.
One question remains for police. If Bill murdered the Wellnitzes, what was his motive? Detectives learn another piece of shocking information when Regina tells them Bill might have pulled the trigger, but someone else masterminded the killings.
She did share with us that Meg had been involved in the planning of this murder and that she had wanted it done. Certainly that was shocking to everybody. She said that Meg had ridden with Bill Meese from Lexington down to Columbia late night, early morning when these murders occurred.
Meg was a big part of the planning and execution of the plan at her parents' house. What we also learned is that they had been planning this 3 months prior to the murders before they did it. We believed at this time that Meg and Bill Meese were the ones responsible for the murders. We had ruled out Regina and Randy Appleton at this time. It was a bombshell for us to learn that information. I couldn't believe it. Totally unexpected.
Ten years after Joe, Beth, and Dennis Wellnitz were shot in cold blood, police now believe Meg Wellnitz wanted her parents dead and asked her friend Bill Meese to kill them.
Based upon my prior history with Meg Wellnitz, I would have never dreamed that she would have been involved in that murder of her parents and sibling. She had become that type of person, not the one that I knew from before. And now all of a sudden I see her in a completely different light when she has no compassion for life.
Before they can lay charges, detectives need hard evidence against Meg and Bill.
One of the things that we learned during the investigation, they had purchased a 9mm high-power Browning automatic. We knew they had done that. They used a false ID, and they used it to make the purchase of the gun. We were able to learn that through a report from ATF, and we actually identified who sold that gun to them, and that the person that sold it to them actually identified Meg and Bill as being the ones that came in.
On February 27, 2003, detectives finally have the evidence they need.
This case was presented to an Adair County grand jury, and the grand jury indicted both Meg Wellnitz and Bill Meese.
Meg is arrested at her home in Lexington, but refuses to speak to police. Bill, who is serving a 12-year sentence for the murder for hire plot, is ready to talk.
During his statement, he certainly indicated to us Meg Wellnitz was involved in the planning. This was done at her urging. This was her idea, and that she wanted it done.
We agreed that she wanted to have her parents killed. She claimed the estate was worth $1 million. She would give me 10% of that estate in exchange for killing her parents.
We had the motivation being money. What we learned was that Meg and Bill drove from Lexington that morning down to Columbia, and that Meg gave Bill the key to the front door. She stays in the car. She does not go into the house.
I walked through the house to the back room, shoved him out of the back room. I engaged him, fired on him. He came toward me and I continued firing. He fell. I went upstairs, into the hall. Elizabeth was standing next to her bed. I engaged and fired on her. She fell. I came back down the hall. I entered Dennis's grave. He was sitting on his back. I engaged him. I emptied the magazine of weapons. He was still sitting up at that time. He broke one down the floor, got on the floor, and shot him back. I then went into the back bedroom and into the closet. I got the firebox, took the box down in the car, took off the clothes I was wearing. I put all of those items, as well as the firearm, 3 magazines, in a black plastic trash bag. I put the black trash bag in the trash container and drove back to that. We got back to Lexington about 6:30 or 7.
It truly was a chilling account of just how cold-hearted he was, not only in doing it, but in talking about it.
Police confront Meg with Bill's confession.
She agreed to then give a statement. When we met with Meg, my observation and my perception of her demeanor and her statements to us certainly was not one of any remorse. It was a matter-of-fact description of what she had done some years prior in having her family killed.
I don't think I could have ever thought of Meg committing a murder or being a part of a murder plan. I know that life insurance might seem like a lot of money, but when you put that cost on lives, it's nothing. Like it's unfathomable to think that she considered their lives that invaluable.
Bill Meese was convicted by a jury of 3 counts of murder, robbery, and burglary, and he was sentenced to death. Meg Wellnitz was convicted of complicity to 3 counts of murder, complicity to robbery, and complicity to burglary, and she received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 25 years.
It's very disturbing to know that this little sweet girl that I remember has been the one that actually played such a big role in this murder. Meg orchestrated one of the most horrendous crimes that you could imagine, killing your mom and dad and also your brother.
I do not think that Meg receiving 25 years was a just sentence. I think she was as guilty as Bill Meese, and I think she should have been given the same type of sentence as Bill Meese, death.
For their daughter to have been the killer was about the most unexpected thing. It was such a shock to try to wrap your head around how could a daughter carry out or be the mastermind. It does not get any more heartless than that, and it does not get any more sickening than that. She didn't deserve to ever be free again.
In 2014, having served 8 years of her life sentence, Meg is found dead in her cell of an apparent suicide.
I certainly could never have imagined that things would have turned out this way. I just feel sad that Joe wasn't able to live out his life the way that he deserved to and continue to give back to the community that he was a part of, and be a father to Dennis and to Meg even. I wish I had gotten to spend more time with him.
It's just hard to understand sometimes why things happen and why they had to lose their lives in that way when they had so much ahead of them. It was a very tragic ending.
The community lost a cherished family. I mean, we miss them as friends. We miss them as part of the community. They were just fine folks.
Assalamu alaikum.